Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3461, Being Stopped. This cloud light sail was an auxiliary type of other shore token from stage 33. Theoretically, if enough energy was put into it, the cloud light sail could become incredibly fast. This other shore token wasn't the most popular of other shore tokens on stage 33 since it was helpful only during travel. But the snake goddess had still merged with it, and it was now coming in handy. The cloud light sail was fast, but the amount of energy it consumed was astonishing. It wouldn't last long even if the snake goddess had cast her shadow in it. Fortunately, even the range of perception the strong masters like Grand Master of Heaven and Claire had by way of their spiritual sense was limited. The snake goddess assumed that if they were far away from their pursuers, they would be able to escape. They headed east, moving further and further away from the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire. Fuxi was relieved. He had fought a good many head-to-head battles in the past few years, but the other Eternal Realm warriors in the Source World always gave in to him. And now, he was the one running away. It was hard for him to accept. Deep in his heart, Fuxi didn't think he was incapable of fighting them. But the snake goddess had made a strategy and he had no choice but to follow her plan and escape. Once Fuxi's spiritual sense could no longer perceive the existence of the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire, he said to the snake goddess, "Have we shaken them off?" The snake goddess was ahead of Fuxi, but her spiritual sense could perceive much more than Fuxi could. "No, I'm afraid we can't get rid of them just by relying on our speed," the snake goddess answered calmly. The distance between them was increasing but the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire had extraordinary tracking abilities that no ordinary Eternal Realm warrior could compare to. It would be difficult to get rid of them when they were in the same big province. The snake goddess stretched out two thin fingers, several small creatures appearing at her fingertips. These creatures were like jellyfish, a mushroom crowning the top of their heads. The mushroom was cracked and two horns sat on top of it. Funnily enough, they looked like monsters that were making faces. Thin tentacles floated below the heads, emitting rays of light in perfect symmetry. Ghost Jellyfish Mask, Transform. The Ghost Jellyfish Mask was a rare other shore token on stage 33. It could easily change into shapes of other creatures and was also an auxiliary type of other shore token. The snake goddess was the incarnation of wisdom. She had cultivated several truths of godly ways and had mastered several other shore tokens of auxiliary type. Other shore tokens of auxiliary type weren't strong by themselves, and ordinary people didn't want any of them to take up a truth of godly way. However, when more than one other shore tokens of auxiliary type were combined, the effect they had would often be terrifying. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The ghost jellyfish mask quickly turned into the reflections of the snake goddess and Fuxi. The fake snake goddess was connected with the fake Fuxi using the shadow of snake goddess, and they were quickly sent backwards. Before long, Fuxi found two identical figures of them floating in front of him too. They were also connected by a shadow of snake goddess as they moved forward. "Let's head south." Saying thus, the snake goddess dragged Fuxi and headed south. The fake snake goddesses and Fuxis were heading east and north, one pair in each direction. Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven who were in hot pursuit after them felt the change at the same time. They looked at each other, stoic in their confusion. Their spiritual sense could cover a long distance, easily sensing anything within a large province. But once their targets moved beyond their range, they became blurry, making it difficult for them to find the true ones. And the snake goddess had perfectly used the ghost jellyfish mask to create their clones. Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven had been quite confident at the beginning, but they began to panic when they suddenly found their targets head in three different directions. If each of them chose a different direction, they would have only 1/3 of the chance to capture and nail down the real targets. If one were to find the true bodies of the people they were chasing, the other would fail. This was something they were finding hard to digest. "Do I have to split myself into several avatars to chase them?" Claire frowned. If it weren't for Grand Master of Heaven, she would have done that. But Zen had just absorbed 1/3 of her body. If she did split into multiple avatars now, there was the possibility of the Grand Master of Heaven killing her instantly. The Grand Master of Heaven had the same concern. He had a secret technique with which he could create a powerful guard for himself that would have 50% of his strength. The downside of this technique was that his own strength would be reduced by half. The two of them wordlessly flew alongside each other for some time before finally choosing to go their separate ways. Claire went after the two avatars in the north, while the Grand Master of Heaven chased the two avatars in the east. Neither made the effort to bother about the avatars in the south. Luck was on Snake Goddess and Fuxie's side, who were actually heading south. The Snake Goddess heaved a sigh of relief on sensing the change in their pursuers' directions. "They will go farther and farther away from us," she said. She infused a huge amount of energy into the two cloud light sails that dragged the two fake pairs, enough for them to fly for some distance. By the time the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire found out that they were chasing in the wrong directions, it would be too late to turn back. Once their targets split into three paths, Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven sped up. They had to confirm whether the targets they were chasing were real as soon as possible. They gave chase for a distance before they realized that the speed of their targets was dropping. "Are these fake?" Claire exclaimed, frowning. She quickly shifted her attention to the targets that the Grand Master of Heaven was chasing. The Grand Master of Heaven also found that his targets had slowed down. He began to shift his attention to the targets that Claire was chasing. They were taken aback when they realized both of them had been chasing the wrong targets, but they recovered quickly enough to turn around and head south. By this time, Fuxie and the Snake Goddess had already approached the edge of the separate Amber Province. They would have a chance to escape once they flew out of the separate Amber Province. The Snake Goddess and Fuxie were becoming more and more optimistic. If they could take Zen away like this, the risks they had taken to snatch Zen from Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven would all be worth it. But they were just about to approach the boundary wall when a long spear suddenly shot out of the wall before them, taking them by surprise. The Snake Goddess had been vigilant all along and had considered every possible obstruction ahead of them. But she had ignored the boundary wall. She had ignored the evil god who could control the boundary wall and detect everything that happened within the separate Amber Province. Boom! The spear shot through the space channel at a high speed and hit the cloud light sail. The cloud light sail was an excellent auxiliary type of other shore token, but was also very fragile. It was shattered by the long spear, causing the Snake Goddess to roll to the side and come to an abrupt stop. Fuxie, who had been following behind, soon caught up with her. He stared at the boundary wall before asking, "What's wrong now?" The existence that could stop the Snake Goddess had to be strong. "Over there," the Snake Goddess pointed. The amber liquid on the boundary wall flowed and turned into a reflection of the evil god. The highly condensed long spear had returned to his hand. "Devouring one is not enough for me. He has to stay." The evil god pointed at Zen, who was on Fuxie's shoulder. "You want to court death?" Fuxie said, his countenance turning cold. If it was only a young man controlling the boundary wall, the man would be no match for him. Chapter 3462, Real Strength. Right now, the evil god's true body was with the members of the Black Ship hundreds of thousands of miles away. After he successfully absorbed Usman's soul, he was constantly exploring his abilities. At present, he could sense the existence of the source world, but the source world was not responding to him. With his current strength, he couldn't use the power of the source world yet, so he could only control the province he was in. Despite this, his combat effectiveness had increased to a higher level. He could now accurately block the attacks of the Snake Goddess, and counterattack using his avatar on the boundary wall. "Ha, aren't you giving up? You can't kill me," the evil god sneered. If it was any other human junior, even if they knew that they had quite an advantage, they wouldn't dare to be so arrogant in front of Fuxie. However, the evil god was different. He was afraid of no one. "Let's see where your arrogance can take you." Boom, boom. Suddenly, the mark of the 8 diagrams exploded on the surface of the evil god's body and caused it to tremble violently. At the same time, the remaining boundary wall of the separate Amber Province also shook wildly. Fuxie immediately recognized that the impact of his attack was deflated. His face darkened. He was attacking the evil god with all his might, but the power of his strike was being transferred. Like Usman, the evil god also gained the ability to use the boundary wall to block his attacks. Furthermore, compared to Usman, the evil god's technique and control were much better. Usman could only transfer the power that he received to a certain part of the boundary wall. With Fuxie's massive punch, he could easily make a big hole in it. On the other hand, the evil god was able to evenly distribute the power to every part of the boundary wall. That meant that it had a better chance of withstanding powerful attacks. Although the boundary wall had already been riddled with countless holes, there was still a huge part that remained intact. So far, the evil god had been able to withstand even the strongest strikes that Fuxi threw at him. In Fuxi's mind, he was indeed wondering how the evil god suddenly appeared and acquired Usman's power. But the greater problem was that the evil god was more adept in using this power than Usman. You know that it wouldn't be easy to kill me. But I could easily crush you. The evil god suddenly reached out his hand and materialized the long amber spear. Actually, the black ship didn't order him to intercept the snake goddess and Fuxi. He attacked them on his own volition because of the past grudges that he still held against them. First, he still bore a huge grudge against Zen. Second, he also badly wanted to get his revenge for what Fuxi had done to him at the gate of the chaotic source world. He would never forget how Fuxi had humiliated him in public. Now that Fuxi and the snake goddess were right in front of him, he decided that it was the right time to retaliate. Swoosh! Upon seeing the evil god who was approaching rapidly with the amber spear, Fuxi stretched out his hand. Crash! Boom! The mark of the 8 diagrams appeared again on the surface of the evil god's body. Fuxi's massive punch instantly exploded as soon as it touched the body of the evil god. However, this time, the evil god didn't transfer the power of Fuxi's punch into the boundary wall. He migrated it into the end of his amber spear. He used Fuxi's own power as a weapon against him. The force of hundreds of thousands of divine megatons gathered at the end of the spear. The evil god didn't need to throw the spear. With the power it contained, it left his hand and darted towards Fuxi at an incredible speed. Fuxi didn't expect that the spear would rush towards him at such a fast speed in that short distance, so it was too late when he began to dodge. The spear instantly pierced through his right chest, leaving a huge bloody hole. With a wave of the evil god's hand, the spear flew back into his hand. He stared at the pitiful state of Fuxi with a devilish grin. The evil god's quick-wittedness was able to drive Fuxi to his limits. At the same time, the snake goddess caught a glimpse of the situation. She immediately went to Fuxi and grabbed Zen's body from behind him. Her body flickered again and appeared in front of the evil god this time. Without any warning, she quickly raised Zen's body and smashed it down on the head of the evil god. At such a close distance, the evil god didn't think twice. He didn't dodge the attack, but immediately turned the tip of his spear towards her. He thought that he could also use the power of the snake goddess, transfer it to his spear, and use it against her. However, the snake goddess had something else in mind. As soon as Zen's body touched the spear and the body of the evil god, they quickly softened and gradually turned into amber-colored liquid. Then, Zen's body quickly absorbed the liquid. The amber liquid was a kind of energy, and the boundary wall was made up of this energy and the space law. In essence, it was completely made up of energy. Since Zen's body could absorb any kind of energy, it instantly devoured the amber liquid. In no time, the avatar of the evil god and the highly condensed spear were both consumed. Fuxi, let's go. The snake goddess turned around and looked at Fuxi with disappointed eyes. Sometimes, Fuxi could be too reckless. If he had just kept his cool, he could have used Zen's body to block the spear just as what the snake goddess did. Fuxi shrugged his shoulders and readied to set off with the snake goddess. However, just when both of them were about to leave the separate amber province, fluctuations occurred in the space surrounding them. Then, Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven came out of the space channel. Whoa, these fakes are very like their real selves, the Grand Master of Heaven said as soon as he saw Fuxi and the snake goddess. Well, in the end, they're just fakes. Since they dared to steal something that belonged to me, they deserve to die. Yeah, I hate deception the most. Claire chimed in with a ferocious smile. Seeing that the two wouldn't let them go without a fight, Fuxi smiled bitterly. Since they wouldn't let them escape easily, they might as well have a good fight. Besides, he hated it when people referred to him as a fake. Fake, huh, then let's see how you'll get crushed by the strength of a fake. While Fuxi's vicious eyes were fixed on the Grand Master of Heaven, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the air. Immediately after, an 8 diagrams disc appeared in his hand. He then threw the 8 diagrams disc in the sky. It constantly grew as it absorbed the wind, turning into a huge 8 diagrams disc that floated in the air. As the 8 diagrams disc spun, Fuxi's aura also drastically changed. Even when he was fighting with the yellow Thirk, he didn't use all his strength. But now, since they were facing two people who were much stronger than them, he had no choice but to go all out. Meanwhile, the shadow of Snake Goddess was also growing. Countless tentacle-like energy beams surged out and attacked the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire at the same time. Although the energy of the shadow of Snake Goddess was extremely terrifying, its speed was subpar to that of the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire. That was why both of them easily avoided her attack. Whoosh, whoosh, the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire rushed towards the Snake Goddess after they successfully avoided her energy beams. Just a bit earlier, these two powerful beings were fighting desperately against each other, but now they were temporarily working together. However, before they could approach the Snake Goddess, a huge shadow suddenly appeared from the sky above them. A gigantic tail with a poisonous needle emerged and shot fiercely at them. Chapter 3463, Element Destruction. The huge tail appeared out of nowhere, and by the time Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven realized what was happening, it was too late to try to dodge it. Boom! In a single blow, both of them were struck and smashed into the depths of the ground. The gigantic creature floating in the sky was no other than Gerald. Earlier, Othniel had sent him to a desolate place in the chaos. However, he exhausted all his means to rush to the separate Amber province. Upon his return, he immediately rushed to help Fuxi and the Snake Goddess. "You can go, I'll deal with them," Gerald's voice boomed loudly. "I'm afraid you can't deal with them alone," replied Fuxi. "What do you mean?" Gerald looked at Fuxi confusedly. He didn't know that Othniel had been caught by the Grand Master of Heaven. The moment those words left his mouth, a violent pain shot up from his tail. Splash! Suddenly, a wisp of dark red flame erupted from the surface of Gerald's tail. Before Gerald had the time to react, his entire tail was burnt to a crisp by the flame. At the same time, Claire's body began to transform rapidly, growing until she became a massive giant of flames. Her beautiful face was no longer visible, instead, raging flames took its place. "I didn't expect to meet such trouble when I descended the first time," she said in a muffled voice. "Well then, let's finish this once and for all." The arrival of the Grand Master of Heaven had been part of the Black Ship's plan all along, but Claire's arrival was just an alternative plan for Yellow Thirk. Even the Yellow Thirk himself was strongly opposed to the way Claire occupied his body. However, as the situation changed, the Yellow Thirk was unable to resist the enemy and finally chose to compromise. Therefore, Claire rushed in hastily, not knowing what to expect. She never thought she'd encounter so much trouble. The series of unfortunate events finally exhausted her patience. In that moment, she decided she would get rid of all these problems, once and for all. Splash! A line of flames appeared in the distance and spread towards them at an incredible speed. It was almost as though the flames weren't traveling through space. In the blink of an eye, the flames had shrouded half of the separate Amber province and even part of the province nearby. Element destruction. Let everything here disappear. Claire rolled her shoulders backwards and lifted her arms to the sky, roaring at the top of her lungs. Then, ice blue lightning flashed around her. Countless streaks of lightning lit up the sky, illuminating the world below. Countless flames like red-hot clouds rained down, followed by ice spears of a few 100,000 feet long. Claire was, after all, a fire spirit comprised of countless more fire spirits. The members of the element spirit race who had reached the same level as Claire could activate the element destruction with their clansmen's help. All the element energies in the area would become chaotic. When the element destruction was displayed, it could destroy everything in the area. This was one of the most powerful theurgies of the element spirit race. Claire's plan was very simple. Zen's body could absorb almost all the energies, which meant he'd come out of this alive. The element destruction, however, would kill all the other irrelevant fellows in one go. When the Grand Master of Heaven saw what was happening, his face turned pale. What was Claire doing? Had she gone mad? Generally speaking, the element spirit race rarely ever used element destruction. The members of the element spirit race didn't have physical bodies. They were all creatures formed from elements. Thus, the element destruction would consume their bodies. The risk was just too great. Within the range of element destruction, Gerald was the largest and the first to feel its attacks. Initially, Gerald didn't take it seriously. Although its destructive power was astonishing, it was easy to display such power if the Eternal Realm warriors used their bloodline to the extreme. Gerald was under the impression that the element destruction was on the same level as the 9 Sun World Destruction Theurgy. With his outstanding healing ability, it was useless even if 10 strong warriors on the same level as Emperor Charm used the 9 Sun World Destruction Theurgy simultaneously. However, when the flames licked at Gerald's body, he began to feel something was wrong. While his black shell was extremely solid, the flames were causing cracks to form on it. Fortunately, the flames only lasted a moment, but the lightning bolts were like countless little earthworms that drilled into his body ruthlessly. Buzz. A bright green light was released from Gerald's body. The wounds inside and outside his body quickly healed. His tail, which had been cut off by Claire, also regenerated. However, the element destruction kept on attacking. Claire was going to stop at nothing until everything in this area was destroyed. A larger size would definitely attract more attacks. After Gerald realized this, his body began to shrink rapidly. He turned into a black scorpion the size of a person and rushed towards Claire. As a chaos ancient god who controlled the truth of life, Gerald had the ability to create lives and conversely, destroy lives. The latter involved poisons. However, these poisons were completely different from the usual ones. The poison surging through Gerald's yellow and green tail was called the poison of decomposition. This type was so lethal that it could poison not only creatures, but also substances. Once the substances, including those things without forms like souls and energies, were infected with the poison of decomposition, they would, as the name implied, start decomposing immediately. Even if Claire was now in the form of a fire giant, Gerald still had the potential to defeat her. However, before Gerald could even get close, the energy of element destruction swept towards him like a snowstorm, forcing him to take a few steps back. Meanwhile, the Grand Master of Heaven had already summoned the 6 soul flags. At the same time, he placed the cyan misty sword in front of him with a pair of golden scissors in his hand. Flood dragons twined around the scissors, flashing a dazzlingly bright gold. It was another magic treasure of the Grand Master of Heaven, the golden dragon scissors. It could cut through almost anything, even energy. However, the power of the element destruction gradually increased. While the Grand Master of Heaven was still able to resist it, he knew he had to do something drastic if he wanted to make it out of this alive. The Snake Goddess and Fuxi were at a disadvantage. Although the two of them were working together, their strength was relatively weak compared to the others. Their only advantage was Zen. Fuxi stood in front of the Snake Goddess and placed Zen in front of him. At the same time, the Snake Goddess used her shadow to form a circular enchanted barrier to protect them. Fuxi kept turning around, trying his best to use Zen as a shield to block the energy. However, the attacks came from all directions. There was no way he'd be able to block all of them. The slightest mistake could cause the Snake Goddess's enchanted barrier to collapse, rendering them vulnerable to the attacks of the element destruction. Chapter 3464, Kill with Poison. Faced with such a crisis, the Snake Goddess was also focusing her entire concentration on the fight. It wouldn't have been possible to catch her off guard right now. As soon as the enchanted barrier was broken, she instantly activated another one. This blood-red enchanted barrier was seemingly as fragile as an eggshell for now, but it was once known as the toughest enchanted barrier in the source world. Unfortunately, things had changed. Just as the second enchanted barrier was activated, it was able to only slightly block the incoming flames before shattering to pieces again. Without hesitation, the Snake Goddess activated several more enchanted barriers. 6 of them were out forward in a row to block the energy that was swarming over towards the team. The truth was, only a small portion of the energy was being blocked, while most of it was being absorbed by Zen. "Let's move. We'll try to get close to the edge of this area," the Snake Goddess suggested. Fuxi instantly understood what she meant. He grabbed her, flew to the side, and was almost instantly at the edge of the area. Once they got close to the edge, they placed Zen's body in front of them. The power of element destruction could only surge from one direction, and with Zen's body in front, it would naturally be completely absorbed by him. With his body, Fuxi and the Snake Goddess had created a small safe haven for themselves. Claire noticed this, but at the moment, her main opponents were not these two. Rather, she was facing the Grand Master of Heaven and Gerald. "Now that you have shown your own abilities, let's see how long you can hold out with those," Claire roared. The power of element destruction was divided into 7 levels, and at the moment, Claire was using the 3rd level. Even then, it was incredibly powerful. So much so that apart from the Snake Goddess, Fuxi, Zen, Gerald, and the Grand Master of Heaven, no other living being could be seen in this area. Every single part of space had been torn apart by the overwhelming elemental energy. The 4th level, Splash. With a burst of extraordinary power, a huge column of swirling wind began to spin in the center of the space, accompanied by intense lightning and flames. As the flames spun with the wind, it looked like they were creating a fiery localized cyclone that would devour everything in its path. When the flames swept over Gerald, layers upon layers of embedded carapaces began to grow on his body. They were a powerful defensive mechanism which could greatly lower the efficiency of the element destruction, protecting Gerald's body from much harm. The Grand Master of Heaven kept a straight face. The golden dragon scissors in his hand instantly shattered all the energy that was trying to approach him. The 5th level. Once the element destruction reached the 5th level, Claire's huge body began to shrink down at a visible speed. She had come there with the yellow Thyrch's body. Now, she was consuming her own strength as well as the yellow Thyrch's to fight. Since she had already activated the element destruction now, she had no intention of giving up. She wasn't going to stop until all of these pesky people in front of her had been turned to ash. The snake goddess and Fuxi curled up together behind Zen, who was still protecting them. The power of the element destruction at the 5th level was already quite terrifying. If it weren't for Zen, the snake goddess and Fuxi wouldn't have been able to hold on even for just a few minutes under such extreme pressure. Even the Grand Master of Heaven and Gerald found it difficult to resist this power. If Claire decided to activate the 6th or 7th level, then there was no telling how powerful she was going to be. They could die if that happened. And then misfortune struck further. While Gerald was lost in thought, he suddenly heard Claire say in a cold voice, the 6th level. Then, the power of the element destruction was further enhanced. Obviously, with the enhancement came its price as well. Claire couldn't hold on for too long now, and her huge body was now shrinking rapidly. But her opponents were going to be able to hold on for an even shorter time. Crack! A thin bolt of lightning drilled into Gerald's body. Under the effect of the element destruction, this seemingly ordinary bolt of lightning had become extremely powerful. It easily penetrated through his carapaces and went all the way through his body, coming out of his back like a slithering snake. The Grand Master of Heaven was also in a fix now. Although he was managing to hold on with a few extremely powerful magic treasures for the time being, once Claire activated the 7th level of her move, even he would be in great danger. Near the edge of the area, the explosive power of the elements surged into Zen's body like a tidal wave. These elements were the most basic ones, but with the efforts the element spirit race had made across countless years, they had evolved into numerous different types. For example, Claire's real body itself was formed from dozens of kinds of flames. Therefore, after Zen had absorbed 1/3 of her real body, more than 30 light pillars had risen in the map. Claire was borrowing the power of the other members of the element spirit race to activate the element destruction. Each of the elements had about 30 to 40 types. In the eternal divine courtyard, the map under the sacred cup suddenly began to respond to the immense energy surge. This time, there were more than 130 light pillars extending all at the same time. The statues on the 4 pillars exchanged some curious glances with each other, but fell silent afterwards. Whatever was happening in front of them was beyond their comprehension. The changes in the map had exceeded all they had ever expected or been trained for. They had nothing left to say or do. The 7th level. Claire finally decided to use the 7th level power of the element destruction, and now, she had no intentions of making any considerations for the yellow Thyrch. After she released the immense power, her own strength was going to suffer a heavy blow, and the yellow Thyrch's body suffered an even more tragic end. Chances were that his body would never be able to come back to its original form. However, just as Claire was about to release the 7th level power, the Grand Master of Heaven suddenly made a move, and a cube appeared in front of him with a flash. At the same time, another cube also appeared in Claire's body, and a third one surrounded Gerald. The 3 spaces where these 3 characters were suddenly turned into one, which was also a kind of theurgy of the space truth. The Grand Master of Heaven joined hands with Claire a moment ago, but now he had no choice but to use Gerald's power. The moment Gerald was enveloped in the cube, he had appeared in Claire's body. Without any hesitation, he pierced his tail through the cube and stabbed at Claire. Energy with 2 different colors, yellow and green, quickly spread through Claire's body. The poison of decomposition had an extremely rapid and powerful effect on soul and energy-based bodies, and was far less effective on creatures with physical bodies. As the poison of decomposition spread around quickly, Claire's huge body quickly collapsed, and pretty soon, disappeared into nothingness. Claire had never expected that the Grand Master of Heaven would be bold enough to send Gerald directly into her body, nor had she expected that the latter's poison of decomposition would be so deadly. Within a short period of time, the poison of decomposition had spread throughout her entire body, and coursed through all her veins. In a moment, her body was completely decomposed. As the poison of decomposition spread over her head, Claire finally realized that she could do nothing to regain her winning position now. She raised her head, and a golden eyeball shot into the sky and disappeared. Far away, the golden eyeball appeared in front of the divine farmer. Then a tattered body formed near the eyeball and slowly took a misshapen shape. It was none other than the body of the yellow Thyrch which had been occupied by Claire for a long time. Nothing but a twisted form was left now. After the eyeball was gone, Claire's huge body instantly dissipated, and the power of the element destruction never managed to reach the 7th level. It began to weaken and dissipate, and finally everything was calm once again. Chapter 3465, Half of the Light Columns. At that moment, Gerald quickly turned into an oval cocoon to protect himself from the element destruction. The element destruction then hit the cocoon, which became charred and carbonized. Soon enough, the element destruction stopped. The charred part of the cocoon cracked, then a pinkish tender body came out of it. The body immediately stiffened and turned into a shiny black shell upon coming out. It looked like Gerald had recovered to normal, but in reality, he had exhausted all of his strength. He was already quite weak. On the contrary, the Grand Master of Heaven, who was nearby, looked a lot better than Gerald. He was unharmed since he relied on a few magic treasures to protect himself, but he still had to maintain the heart-piercing lock to restrain Othniel. The amount of energy used by the heart-piercing lock was not significant, but the Grand Master of Heaven had consumed a large amount of energy to resist the element destruction. Thus, it wasn't easy to maintain the heart-piercing lock as it was before. Therefore, the Grand Master of Heaven's overall situation wasn't actually much better than Gerald's. Far away from them, after the snake goddess withdrew the blood-red enchanted barrier, she and Fuxi slowly appeared behind Zen. Fuxi took a deep breath, but his eyes still twitched. The energy he released when he used the marks of 8 diagrams was the strongest kind of power in the source world. Furthermore, he thought that since he had gone to numerous battles in the 3 purities stage, there was nothing to fear. But he was utterly shocked when the element destruction happened. The element destruction didn't affect a large area, and only half of the province got hit, but the force that struck the province was far beyond what he had imagined. Was that how powerful that member from the element spirit race was? "Let's go," the snake goddess shouted. She looked at the distance and quickly pulled Fuxi while she activated the grand teleportation. After she opened a space channel, the two of them went inside. A smile graced the Grand Master of Heaven's face when he saw them escape hurriedly. Then, he followed them. Claire, who was the most troublesome to deal with, was gone, and Gerald was already weak. The snake goddess and Fuxi were just like mice. Everything would be under his control. Whoosh! The moment the Grand Master of Heaven moved, Gerald's tail suddenly stabbed him. The tail's poisonous needle glowed with a cyan light, which was another kind of deadly poison. In turn, the Grand Master of Heaven abruptly turned around and revealed a mocking smile. At the same time, a cyan ray of light flashed and hit Gerald's tail. Crack! Once again, the cyan light sliced Gerald's tail. As soon as his tail fell off, black flames engulfed his body. It was difficult to kill a Chaos Ancient God, especially if it was someone like Gerald, who had unparalleled life energy. Still, the black flames that enveloped him were enough to restrain him for a while. Since Gerald couldn't escape, he had no choice but to produce more body tissues to isolate the uncontrollable black flames from his body. It was indeed impossible for him to chase after the Grand Master of Heaven in this situation. In the end, the Grand Master of Heaven successfully went into the space channel and chased the snake goddess and Fuxi. On the boundary wall not far away, the evil god's body took shape once more. The spear and body he had previously condensed with the boundary wall had long since disappeared in the element destruction. Moreover, he felt quite regretful when he saw Fuxi have taken Zen away and left the separate Amber province. For him, it would be best if the warriors killed each other in the element destruction, then that was when he would finally show up and devour everyone else, including the Grand Master of Heaven. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out the way he planned. Now, even Zen had run away. He wasn't sure if the Grand Master of Heaven would have any issues if he devoured Zen. If the Grand Master of Heaven caught Zen, he probably wouldn't hand Zen over. What was worse for him was that his power only worked within the separate Amber province. If he went beyond the boundary wall, the body formed by the boundary wall would collapse. Thus, he could not follow them. In the darkness, Zen saw more and more mountain-like light dots, which continued to get closer to him. At first, the light dots lined up in an almost random way. As they increased, however, he gradually discovered that the light dots seemed to convey some sort of information. There was a kind of violent energy inside the light dot nearest to him. When his consciousness touched the light dot, he felt an intense burning sensation, as if there was fire trapped inside it. Meanwhile, the light dot on the far left felt extremely cold. He would be frozen if he approached it. The energy inside the light dots was quite pure and primitive. It was so pure that it didn't seem to be energy at all, but rather a creature. Since he got trapped in the darkness, the light dots continuously increased at random speeds. Sometimes it was fast, and sometimes it was slow. They also increased by varying numbers, as sometimes only a few new ones came up, sometimes it was a dozen. Most incredibly, nearly more than 100 new light dots appeared not long ago. He couldn't figure out the rules at first, but as the number of light dots increased, the rules got revealed. Some of the light dots contained the power of space and time. The other light dots that were connected to them had the same attributes and were arranged in an orderly fashion. There was a gap between the light dots that were together. He guessed it was because there were other light dots with a similar energy that hadn't lit up. Would he only get to leave this dark space when all the light dots had lit up? He could only wonder. But how did the light dots light up anyway? Did it all depend on luck, or was there a pattern he had yet to comprehend? He couldn't do anything after he entered this dark space, except to wait quietly. In the eternal divine courtyard, the 4 bronze statues began to discuss intensely after a moment of silence. There are already 186 light columns that have lit up. Do you remember the legend that once spread in the eternal divine courtyard? The bronze bird asked the bronze monkey. When the number of light columns that have lit up is more than half of the total number, the ancestry-level bloodline would automatically become complete. Yes, I remember. There was indeed such a legend. I just thought that such a thing couldn't possibly happen at that time. I simply thought it was a story, the bronze human said excitedly. The other bronze statues also became ecstatic when the bronze bird asked the question. At that time, only a few creatures were qualified to enter the sacred cup. Furthermore, even fewer of them could light up a dozen light columns in the map. If half of the light columns, or 187 light columns to be exact, have lit up, then the remaining light columns would automatically rise to complete the bloodline map. Now with one more column to light up, the number would reach half. What if the legend was true? How strong would the ancestry-level bloodline be in its complete state? The 4 bronze statues all had the same thought. If they could see it with their own eyes, then it would be worth even if they would end up dead. At that point, Fuxi and the snake goddess were still running like mad in the space channel while they carried Zen. Although the snake goddess had condensed the cloud light sail again, it took some time for the sail to speed up. During that period, the Grand Master of Heaven had already caught up with them. Chapter 3466, The Purple Lightning Hammer. The cyan misty sword cut through space silently and sent a straight cyan light from the void which hit the cloud light sail. Splash! With the cloud light sail slashed, a large hole appeared in the center as it began to collapse from the inside out. Fuxi and the snake goddess had just sped up but now came to sudden dead stop. Those 2 fakes are really quite powerful, remarked the Grand Master of Heaven. But that's it, I've had enough. He had once feared the real Fuxi. But since joining the Nihility race, he had improved his strength immensely and could now kill ordinary warriors at the Eternal Realm effortlessly. Now, even the real Fuxi was no match for him, let alone his avatar. But the 2 avatars' tenacity exceeded the Grand Master of Heaven's expectations. He raised the cyan misty sword and the sword radiance soared up into the sky. From his body burst an intense aura powerful enough to pierce through the heaven and earth. A mark of 8 diagrams then covered him, just as he brandished his sword. Fuxi had quick fists and so the fist radiance would be released as soon as the mark of 8 diagrams appeared. Before the Grand Master of Heaven even knew what was going on, he had already been struck by Fuxi's terrifying fist radiance. Boom! Caught off guard, the Grand Master of Heaven was flung in the distance. Seal, limitless power, whoosh! The 8 diagrams disc above Fuxi's head rotated and countless marks of 8 diagrams, both small and large, condensed all over the Grand Master of Heaven's body. Fuxi was like a beast rushing at its prey. Every muscle in his body swelled and his shoulder blades raised high like little wings. The limitless power was one of the 8 diagrams disc's unique techniques. He could use the 8 diagrams disc to maximize his bloodline and summon triple his base power in a short period of time. The snake goddess interlocked her fingers and strands of crimson light flowed and flashed from her fingertips. Faceless phantom, sizzle. Suddenly, a dark faceless figure appeared on the other side of the Grand Master of Heaven. Although it had no visible face, its appearance and aura were the same as Fuxi's. This was the effect of the faceless phantom. It could create an identical phantom within a certain range which possessed all the power of its real counterpart. In this way, Fuxi could double his attack power. The air froze for around 3 seconds and he paused. Then, his hands transformed into numerous shadows, charging at the Grand Master of Heaven at blistering speed, the phantom mirroring both him and his speed. Boom, 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 boom. The fist radiance exploded when it came into contact with the marks of 8 diagrams. The shock waves that resonated from the impact tore everything in the surrounding spaces apart and decimated them to pieces as small as a grain of sand. They were so small that they looked like smoke as they shot and spread out in all directions. Fuxi kept this relentless pummeling up for 5 minutes straight. Spurred on by the limitless power, a single punch could seriously injure an Eternal Realm Master, and it would take 5 punches at most to kill him for sure. In 5 minutes, he had struck out heaps of times. When the limitless power was depleted, the 8 diagrams disc floating above Fuxi's head dimmed. The swelling in his muscles went down and he shrunk to his normal height, breathing heavily and exhausted as he returned to his ordinary state. The eruption of such incredible power caused his body to emit a ridiculous amount of heat. A piece of raw meat would be scorched instantly if put anywhere near him. The sand-sized fragments slowly dissipated, gradually revealing the Grand Master of Heaven. Fuxi's eyes widened when he saw that he had come out of it unscathed. He was well aware that he was powerful and so he had held nothing back. He thought that even if he could not kill the Grand Master of Heaven, he had certainly done enough to make him suffer. But the truth was far from what he had imagined. "Well," began the Grand Master of Heaven, smiling ever so slightly, "in comparison to the rest, you may very well possess the most strength during the last several hundred chaotic eras. I think it's safe to say you're powerful enough to be the Son of Truth in the next round of chaos. Unfortunately, there won't be a next round of chaos," he continued, shrugging his shoulders. Buzz. He lifted his cyan misty sword and countless cyan lights rained down on the snake goddess and Fuxi like a storm. They fell in straight lines and were so scattered that some of them were not aimed at them. But then, a small cube formed in the Grand Master of Heaven's eye and those cyan lights changed their path. And headed straight for Fuxi and the snake goddess. "Keep your distance from the lights." With Zen in one hand and the other holding the snake goddess, Fuxi flew downward to avoid the cyan lights. They then refracted once more, turning and shooting at Fuxi. Unable to dodge, he lifted Zen and placed him on his head. Da, 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 the cyan sword lights came down Zen's body like a dense rainfall. His body absorbed the sword light's energy like a black hole and was left barely damaged. However, as he had already absorbed the cyan sword lights before, no new light column rose in the eternal divine courtyard. Seeing this, the Grand Master of Heaven frowned and shot more cyan sword lights, at the same time flashing the cube in his eye and refracting the cyan sword lights further to let them come at Fuxi from all directions. Fuxi spun Zen in his hands, rotating him like a wheel. He couldn't quite come up with a way to deal with the Grand Master of Heaven. But with Zen as an invincible shield, he could defend himself rather well. Da, 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 no matter how many times the cyan sword lights were refracted and no matter which angle they came from, Zen took them all. "It seems that you've gotten ahead of yourself, Grand Master of Heaven," Fuxi said, shrugging with a smile. They hadn't confirmed the Grand Master of Heaven's identity until they had heard how Claire addressed him. They then had a rough idea of who he was. Even at an absolute disadvantage and on the defensive, Fuxi didn't panic. Instead, there was a shrewd smile across his face. Obviously, the Grand Master of Heaven was as powerful as the Chaos Ancient Gods. He had possibly even slightly surpassed them. If Fuxi hoped to defeat such an opponent, he would have to remain on the defensive and wait patiently to exploit his few flaws once they were exposed. When Fuxi had finished speaking, his smile slowly retreated and his intense seriousness returned. The Grand Master of Heaven stretched out his hand and a big purple hammer materialized in it. It was another of his powerful magic treasures, the Purple Lightning Hammer. Chapter 3467, Completely Absorbing. This was the most formidable magic treasure of the Grand Master of Heaven. When he yielded the handle of the Purple Lightning Hammer securely in his grip, the lightning snake emitting extremely daunting aura coiled itself around it till it reached the surface of the hammer. Sizzle. The breathtakingly eminent aura radiating from the pure purple lightning made the onlookers gasp in awe. Fuxi and the snake goddess remained rooted to their spots, and their pupils shrank visibly at this sight. Apparently, they too felt intimidated by the daunting presence of the Purple Lightning Hammer. The Grand Master of Heaven seemed unbothered and refused to hold back. He had attempted to catch the two for quite a long time without tasting the sweet nectar of success. Because of that, his patience had run out, and there was no longer any room for error. When the black fire was extinguished by Gerald, he would catch up again. The Grand Master of Heaven feared if he didn't act quickly, everything he worked so hard for would slip away from his hands once more. Boom! The Grand Master of Heaven glared at the space ahead of him and raised his hammer before smashing it into thin air. Visually, there was nothing in front of him. But when he swung the hammer in the air, it seemed to have hit an obstruction that was indestructible. As a result, the collision sent down shockwaves as it experienced violent tremors. The repercussions were so severe that they pushed back the Grand Master of Heaven a few steps. Amidst the wild outburst of the explosion, countless bolts of thin purple lightning gathered and morphed themselves into the shape of a thick lightning snake that charged towards Fuxi. Crack! Acting on his sharp reflexes, Fuxi took the initiative and lifted Zen upright in the nick of time. Buzz! The moment the lightning snake came in contact with Zen's body, it switched its previous ferocious form and transformed into many purple lightning flowers. Within a flash, Zen had absorbed more than half of the energy of the purple lightning snake, causing its intensity to weaken. However, after the lightning snake jumped on Zen's body once, the rest of it switched its course of direction to pounce at Fuxi and the snake goddess. Crack! Crack! It was one of the attributes of thunder and lightning. Once a bolt of lightning was released, it would jump several times before coming to a stop. Even though it was weakened by Zen absorbing more than half of its energy, the remaining energy of the purple lightning snake still posed as a severe threat to Fuxi and the snake goddess. When the lightning snake bounced off of him a third time, its energy was reduced substantially. Even so, when it struck the snake goddess, it sent her lightweight body flying high before she fell to the ground with a heavy thump. The moment Fuxi's body was thrown off like a ragdoll, Zen's physical body lost contact with him as he was forced to let go of his hand. Taking advantage of the circumstances, the Grand Master of Heaven reached out to grab Zen. However, the energy formed due to the space fluctuation was consumed by Zen's body before he could lay his hands on him. How could he catch him now? Frustrated by the constant delays, the Grand Master of Heaven frowned before executing the grand teleportation technique to directly appear beside Zen. Only then did he manage to grab Zen and he carried him on his shoulder. After securing Zen, the Grand Master of Heaven had no business left with Fuxi or the snake goddess. He could just ignore them and move on. But when he began to recall all the unnecessary trouble these two had caused him, a wild fit of rage began to consume every fiber of his being. With a tight grip on his purple lightning hammer, he charged in the direction of Fuxi's motionless body with a newly found desire for revenge. Surrounded by darkness, Zen was still recovering from his daze. Although he had no sense of direction on what he should do, he decided he could not just sit back and watch anymore. The appearance of those light dots gave off the impression that they were connected to him in some way. However, they did not rely on his sheer will, and they didn't seem to be affected by the depth of his comprehension either. He had thought long and hard about it, but he still failed to come up with a logical conclusion to interpret the situation. Buzz! Another light dot flickered freely in the air as it lit up. Zen's consciousness quickly swept across the light dot. As per his analysis, it only contained the explosive power of both thunder and lightning. Zen's consciousness did not linger on this light dot. In fact, the energy entrapped in each light dot was free of all impurities and thus was formidable. As long as he could figure out a way to gain control of even one of them, he could bear the fruit of pure primitive power. However, Zen was overwhelmed by the presence of so many light dots dominating the space. It so happened that this was only one of the over 180 light dots. In his confusion, Zen didn't realize there were a total of 187 light dots after this one was lit up. Meanwhile, within the boundaries of the eternal divine courtyard, the bronze monkey couldn't contain his excitement as he watched this scene unfold. He kept jumping up and down enthusiastically. In contrast to the bronze monkey, the bronze bird, the bronze snake, and the bronze human maintained their composure. However, the intensity of the sparkle igniting in their eyes testified their increasing expectations. The ancestry-level bloodline was pure. But at the very same time, it had lost all of its distinctive characteristics. It was the creatures that had entered the sacred cup that had once again made the ancestry-level bloodline complete. Simultaneously, it became complicated and also managed to reclaim its once lost characteristics. The 187th light column has risen. The bronze human murmured, concealing his apparent excitement. Each of them was at the edge of their seats, anticipating whether the legend could finally come true. Although their growing excitement was undeniable, they still harbored concerns in a deep corner of their existence. After all, legends were sometimes nothing more than myths altered through history. The remaining light columns seemed to have no intention of rising. Meanwhile, in the deep pits of darkness, Zen felt his consciousness slowly sink into an unusual state, which he had never experienced before. In fact, after each light dot appeared before him, Zen sensed a more in-depth understanding build up in his mind about the energy it carried inside. But after that light dot rose up just now, something far stranger happened. He could feel the light dots which connected to his left and right sides, and deduce those that did not exist. It all came naturally to him. It was as if right after someone counted from 1 to 4, without a hitch, Zen began to count from 5 to 8. Buzz. Completely engulfed in this strange state of deduction, those dots of light that didn't exist suddenly appeared and stationed themselves in their spots. 1, 2, 3. In the map, one after the other, many light pillars began to extend at a frightening yet even speed. Previously the light pillars in the map made a sudden appearance, but then they stopped growing just as abruptly as they came. Now that the other light pillars appeared with a constant speed, there was definitely something mysterious about this. Is it finally starting? Is this really happening? The moment that was once witnessed by history repeats itself. That legend is true. The 4 statues couldn't help themselves, wanting to get a closer look at the incredible scene taking shape right in front of them. Each of them left the pillars again and walked to the edge of the square to feast their eyes on something they had waited for desperately to happen. In a short while, the remaining 186 light pillars had gradually risen one after the other. In the map, below the sacred cup, the light pillars were arranged in equal proportions, and they were evenly distributed on every portion, forming a pattern. When the very last light column connected itself with the others, the map became flawless. The ancestry-level bloodline in the sacred cup began to boil and drill into Zen's body. The thick blood in the cup emptied itself at an alarming speed as if rushing to familiarize itself with his body. Ever since the ancestry-level bloodline existed in the eternal divine courtyard, it had never decreased. Instead of saying that one fused with the ancestry-level bloodline within the sacred cup at will, it was more accurate to say that the ancestry-level bloodline gave the warrior who entered the sacred cup the powerful bloodline and unfathomable power. But this time was different. The ancestry-level bloodline actually drilled itself into Zen's body willingly. The ancestry-level bloodline was as thick as glue. When it moved along Zen's meridians, his meridians bulged out in such a way that it looked as if a little rat was frantically moving along them. Zen could endure the massive volume of blood pouring into him because of his astonishingly strong body. If his body fell short of the requirement and was weaker than it was, his meridians would probably burst open due to not being able to hold it all in. After a short while, all the blood that originally filled up the sacred cup had been emptied into Zen's body. At this sight, the 4 bronze statues' mouths fell to the ground with utter astonishment. Silence reigned the air before the bronze bird took the initiative and spoke. Has the ancestry-level bloodline been possessed by him? Judging by the bronze bird's growing grim expression, he seemed to be thirsting for the ancestry-level bloodline that was now possessed by Zen. The increasing desperation in his eyes felt like he was eager to cut open Zen's belly to extract all of it for himself. The bronze snake beside him had a similar intention. Although they were happy to see Zen create such a miracle, it was difficult for them to digest the fact that he took away all of the ancestry-level bloodline. Well, let him take it. The bronze monkey, who had been very radical from the start, seemed to have thought of something. His eyes flashed in response to his emotions and reflected a different color, as if he was expecting something big to happen. Chapter 3468, Return. In most cases, they say that eternity was nothing but a synonym for destruction. Running water is never stale, and a door hinge never gets worm-eaten. Only something so dynamic could achieve genuine eternity. This was inside the thoughts of the bronze monkey. If there was not a single blood receiver that could enter the eternal divine courtyard, then the place would lose the purpose of its existence. After the eternal divine courtyard was sealed by the time lock, it was regarded to be worthless and was just something that awaited its impending destruction. But in the end, this human unexpectedly broke in and soaked himself into the sacred cup without hesitation. With this human actually extended the lifespan of the eternal divine courtyard. Now, changes that were never foreseen should be expected. The bronze human also had the same thought, so he immediately stopped the bronze bird and the bronze snake. After some time, the 4 bronze statues came to an agreement. In the meantime, they would quietly observe the sacred cup and see what would happen. Still shrouded in darkness, all of the light dots that appeared in front of Zen had been completely lit up. They were arranged in such a way that they formed 4 neat triangles together. At this time, the meanings contained within the light dots were all grasped by Zen. The meaning of power is completely beyond the limits of the chaos. Zen was immersed in this thought. The power of the 3,000 godly ways was based on the most original power of the chaos, which was also the foundation of the entire chaos. On the other hand, the 373 entities of power in the light dots were way more extensive and profound. They covered wider ranges and were formed based on rules of higher levels. They could even be called the origin of everything. Inside Zen's mind, this information flashed like bolts of lightning. All of a sudden, he seemed to have a fair understanding of everything. Whoosh! All of the lights intensely brightened as Zen's eyes snapped open. Eventually, he regained all of his 6 senses. He had a brief struggle to adapt as his consciousness gradually returned. It was like the sensation of being awakened from a very long dream. He was still lying quietly inside the sacred cup, staring blankly at the huge dome of the eternal divine courtyard. He felt sort of lightheaded as his consciousness was still somewhat in a blur. Then, he gently moved a finger, followed by his arms, legs, until he could already feel his whole body. Swoosh! With a quick somersault, Zen leapt from the cup and landed steadily on the ground. As he looked down, he noticed that there was a perfect bloodline map sketched on the square. Whoosh! 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 The 4 bronze statues immediately jumped into the square again. This time, they all showed deep respect on their faces. After all, as long as one could get the approval of the ancestry-level bloodline, it would be more than enough to make them bow down in respect. This was because all creatures that were approved by the ancestry-level bloodline were regarded as the top talents in the 4-spirit sect. Moreover, Zen turned out as someone beyond their comprehension as he directly absorbed all of the ancestry-level bloodline. As they looked at Zen, they were no longer able to define his abilities. Never did they expect that such a thing could possibly happen. Human, what are your plans after inheriting the ancestry-level bloodline? The bronze human asked while bowing respectfully to Zen. Zen immediately knew that the changes in their attitudes were only brought by him merging with the ancestry-level bloodline. He wondered if the bloodline was really worth that much respect from them. Nonetheless, Zen had a precise feeling that the bloodline flowing within him was indeed something extraordinary. My plans. Of course, I would be returning to my world, Zen said flatly. He knew that he rarely had anything to do with the eternal divine courtyard, so he didn't see any reason to stay behind. Now that he had achieved his goal in this place, he decided that it was time to return. He was actually been trapped here for so long, and he was worried that something bad might have happened to the Oneness Sky Palace during his long absence. With his nonchalant reply, there was an obvious change in the expressions of the 4 bronze statues. They had actually figured out that Zen was most probably from another world. However, those worlds were insignificant in the eyes of bronze statues. The only thing that was important for them was the eternal divine courtyard, as well as the shackle attached to it, the time lock that had sealed the courtyard. You're going to return to your original world? What for? Does that even matter now? The bronze monkey didn't understand Zen's logic, so he was totally confused. Zen was kind of annoyed by the response of the bronze monkey and said, then can you tell me what matters? Human, you have acquired the ancestry-level bloodline. You can be considered as the new master of the eternal divine courtyard. Don't you want to start anew in this place? The bronze human hinted at Zen with a pleasant smile. Zen was kind of surprised. The new master, do you really think so? I could really assume that position? He asked with a faint smile. The 4 bronze statues exchanged glances, then fell silent. This immediately made Zen see through their facade. At the back of the minds of the bronze statues, the real master of the eternal divine courtyard would always be the 4-spirit sect. Moreover, the purpose of the existence of the statues was to protect the ancestry-level bloodline, and make sure that it was safeguarded in the eternal divine courtyard throughout generations. However, Zen's unexpected appearance gave the bronze statues a new idea. Since Zen had absorbed the ancestry-level bloodline, he could really be considered as the new master of the eternal divine courtyard. With his power, he could even restart and continue the legacy of the courtyard. First, I have no intention to be the master of this place. I just got what I needed according to the rules. Maybe I'll come back when the proper time calls for it, but right now, I have to return to my original world as soon as possible, Zen explained to the bronze statues. Right after he spoke, Zen tapped his toe on the ground. Whoosh! A square dimension spread out from beneath his feet, and a passageway opened on the ground that instantly swallowed him in. Swoosh! In a matter of seconds, Zen fell into the space below the eternal divine courtyard. It was the space where the bloodline known as the infinite time and space existed. Since it had been a long time since Zen had entered the eternal divine courtyard, the Spider-Man who was imprisoned in that cube believed that Zen should have already died. Thinking about this, his heart was filled with regret. He had almost succeeded in saving himself. If he had just lured Zen into the cube, he should have escaped already from this place. Furthermore, he thought that he should have been the one who got the chance to acquire and merge with the ancestry-level bloodline. Now, he thought that he might never have the chance to escape. The Spider-Man didn't have anything to do but recall the scene over and over again. With just a simple mistake, his situation had turned out for the worst. However, while he was wallowing in his regrets, he had no clue that he was about to meet Zen again. Then, without any warning, Zen abruptly appeared in this space once more. The Spider-Man's eyes widened as soon as he saw him. He started speaking to him in his unique language, ignoring his disheveled hair. Heavenly Obsession Civilization, translate it for me, Zen ordered. The civilization artifact of the Heavenly Obsession Civilization quickly activated its core and translated what the Spider-Man was saying. Young man, did you get the ancestry-level bloodline? The Spider-Man asked impatiently. However, he strongly believed that Zen wouldn't be able to obtain it. He thought that Zen must have left the Eternal Divine Courtyard without gaining anything. Well, what do you think? Instead of answering directly, Zen just answered back with a faint smile. If you didn't get the ancestry-level bloodline, I can teach you the skill for merging the infinite time and space. Even with just this, you will be strong enough. The Spider-Man offered eagerly. It was as if he had completely forgotten that he had attempted on attacking Zen the previous time they met. However, Zen pretended to be interested in what he was saying. He descended to the cube where the Spider-Man was and asked, "What is this skill that you're talking about? Give me a finger then. Hurry, I'll demonstrate it for you." The Spider-Man's eyes seemed to be unusually desperate. He forced a smile and thought that Zen was a fool. Zen went along and stretched out one of his fingers. As soon as his finger was stuck into the cube, the Spider-Man grabbed it desperately, as if it was his last lifeline. He believed that if he could successfully pull Zen inside, everything would work out for him. He was thrilled and nervous at the same time. However, while he touched Zen's finger, his movement suddenly stopped, and his expression changed drastically. Chapter 3469, Exploration. The finger in the Spider-Man's hand seemed ordinary, but a strange flame lingered around it. Even though he was exceptionally strong, he instantly felt an unbearable pain when he touched it. He had been trapped in the cube for countless years and endured all kinds of torture. However, he couldn't take the pain from the formless flame around Zen's hand. He quickly withdrew his hand. But how could he give up such a great opportunity? As soon as he pulled out his hand, he spat out the green spider silk towards Zen's hand. The spider silk was his race's unique ability. His race lived between space layers and inside space cracks, so the spider silk also had a special space quality. No one else could break the spider silk they released. The spider silk quickly wrapped around Zen's hand, and at the same time, the Spider-Man's 8 legs stepped back. Then, he unleashed a powerful force that pulled Zen into the square space. If Zen didn't use the celestial spear, he wouldn't be as strong as the Spider-Man in terms of strength alone. The Spider-Man became extremely excited when he saw that Zen was pulled into the space by him. If he successfully pulled in a person, then he would be able to leave this place. Still, he wouldn't kill Zen. He wanted to keep Zen alive, so Zen would also be tortured and suffer in living prison. Whoosh! He tried to rush out of the square space, but a loud, bang, sound followed after he came into contact with the space's inner wall. He slammed into the wall, and the space still prevented him from leaving. What happened? Out of panic, he stretched out a long, thin leg and stabbed the inner wall. Boom! The wall also blocked his leg. He was very desperate now. How could this be? This is impossible. It's simply impossible. He turned around and saw Zen, who calmly stood on the other side with a faint smile on his face. At that moment, he suddenly realized something. It must be Zen who played those tricks. Previously, Zen had been very cautious and didn't even dare to approach the square space. Now that he suddenly dared to come in, he must have done something. What did you do? Let me out, or else, I will kill you. Buzz. The Spider-Man's legs began to glow. It was clear that he only wanted to kill Zen now because he was upset. Yet, Zen just looked around and said with a smile, "It seems that the inner space is still big. It should be smaller." The moment he finished speaking, his figure flashed and left the square space. When he left, the space began to shrink. This place could become large or small in the first place. After the Spider-Man stayed inside it for so long, he had understood the infinite time and space to a certain degree, and he could also adjust the internal space. However, he encountered Zen this time. As the origin-level bloodline, the infinite time and space was originally derived from the ancestry-level bloodline. The moment Zen touched the square space, he had already analyzed the structure of the infinite time and space, and also grasped the method to control such energy. As the space continued to shrink, the Spider-Man's fear also increased. How did you do it? Did you fuse with the infinite time and space? Why? He was naturally afraid, and as a result, the energy in his legs erupted. Numerous light pillars with destructive powers swept through the space's inner walls. Yet, the square space remained unmoved, and he couldn't do anything but watch it shrink further. When the space shrank to about 10 feet in length, the Spider-Man felt his body get squeezed. In turn, he tried his best to curl up and adapt to the increasingly small space. But when the space shrank to 5 feet in length, he finally couldn't bear the pressure anymore. Cracking sounds filled the air as his 8 legs broke, and his big body was squashed. "Let's stop here," Zen said coldly. "Let me out, please." The Spider-Man managed to croak out a plea for mercy. His face was squeezed against the space's inner wall, while his eyes and nose pressed into a flat plane. At that point, the pain he felt was 100 times greater than before. It was an extremely terrifying torture that even made him wish for death. However, Zen turned around and left as if he didn't know what happened or hear the Spider-Man's begging. He didn't care about the Spider-Man's situation at all. After all, the Spider-Man was determined to kill him. If he hadn't gotten lucky enough, he would have been trapped there for the rest of his life. He had no mercy for such an opponent. Buzz. He stepped forward and headed for another space, which was the location of the bloodline called Myriad Birth and Destruction. Click. He stood on the ground again. Then a seedling drilled into his feet and spread along his legs. He didn't struggle or move, and instead allowed the seedling to grow. When it grew and took shape, he gently stepped back. A tree that outlined the meridians all over his body took shape. Technically speaking, the tree should dissipate on its own after he moved away from it. This time, however, something unexpected happened. He reached out his hand and gently stroked the tree. The tree then glowed with an emerald light and emitted the aura of vitality. "It looks like after I fused with the ancestry-level bloodline, I can grasp the origin-level bloodlines quickly," he commented happily. Then, he took another step forward and returned to the second space. There was an Ouroboros carved on the bronze mountain in the second space. It was the space of the bloodline called Ultimate Cycle. Among the 4 origin-level bloodlines, the infinite reproduction, the myriad birth and destruction, and the infinite time and space had roughly visible outlines. However, the meaning of the ultimate cycle was unknown. Even its form was invisible. Now that he had the ancestry-level bloodline as his support, Zen became curious and naturally wanted to comprehend it. In a split second, he stood on the bronze mountain, just at the center of the Ouroboros. Swoosh! An invisible wave came from the Ouroboros. Then, the Ouroboros statue began to move, and it swallowed its tail bit by bit. Although the snake devoured itself, its tail also continued to grow. Such a process was an infinite cycle. When the Ouroboros began to rotate, Zen also felt that the ancestry-level bloodline in his body had started to react. A strange image surrounded him, and a world that developed in endless cycles appeared in front of him. Everything in that world grew and then died. Soon enough, a new world was born. Is this the chaos, or is it similar to the chaos? He asked in confusion. Just then, several similar worlds appeared in front of him. Just like the previous world, those worlds were also destroyed and quickly revived, full of life. Chapter 3470, Conjecture. There is more than one chaos, Zen uttered in realization. This picture had just given him a piece of vital information. Within it, worlds were constantly rebuilt and destroyed, and Zen found it best to look at them carefully. Soon, he was able to find something wrong. Even with the constant cycle of rebirth, the internal energy of the worlds remained constant, though Zen felt the addition of new energy every time they died. For example, if a world was made up of 10 units of energy, upon its death, it would create 3 more units of energy. Of course, it did not sound many on paper, but when one thought about it, if every world was destroyed with 1/3 more energy, then wasn't it actually terrifying? As the world died, this added energy would burst out and then also quietly disappear. This observation made Zen frown. Where did this extra energy go? Upon further investigation, he was able to discover something. At the moment of destruction, violent energy fluctuations would burst out and a spurt of strong energy would escape from the bottom as if sucked away by something. Zen could only make a rough judgment since all he could base his assumptions on was this virtual picture. However, he had a good source he could ask. Primeval Lord of Heaven, what do you think is the significance of the chaos? Every existence in this world had a purpose. The chaos was no exception. It was obviously built to serve some kind of purpose. Maybe the instant civilization built it to expand their influence. The Primeval Lord of Heaven suggested. He had sensed that Zen already had a conclusion, so all he could offer was a baseless suggestion. If they wanted to expand their influence, then they could have lived and multiplied within the chaos after they built it. The element spirit civilization would have never risen in power and there wouldn't have been various kinds of ruling civilizations, Zen muttered. This theory of Zen's had long since been put forwarded by other people but with differing opinions. Some claimed that the instant civilization sowed the seeds of civilizations and was so strong that they did not bother asking for anything to return. A few would say that the chaos was an unexpected world, which was probably why it was constantly rebuilt and destroyed over the ages. All sorts of assumptions were made and floated around as time went on. However, it was obvious that Zen had just learned something different from the ultimate cycle, so the primeval Lord of Heaven saw it fit to hear what he had to say. The instant civilization or the Four Spirits sect probably built the chaos to absorb its energy. With this in mind, they had probably built more than one if they wanted to collect a huge amount, Zen continued as he gazed at the picture in the distance. The primeval Lord of Heaven couldn't help but frown. But the energy within the chaos should be constant and non-renewable. The total amount of chaos should remain the same from its conception until this very moment. Zen shook his head. I disagree. The energy actually increases by a third when a new chaos is built and loses the same amount when it is destroyed. Only through this can balance be achieved. Zen's statement made the primeval Lord of Heaven's eyes tremble. He transmitted his words to the other heroes and one of them, the snake goddess to be exact, let out a laugh. A puzzled expression appeared on Zen's face when he heard it. Why are you laughing, snake goddess? Ask the primeval Lord of Heaven, she replied. The primeval Lord of Heaven sighed. She's the most intelligent person in our human race and also extremely sensitive to energy. In the past, the snake goddess once invented a unique method of measuring the total energy in the chaos. The primitive land, the various worlds, the chaotic clouds, everything within the chaos was made up of materials and composed of energy. She used a unique method to calculate the total energy of the chaos and came upon the conclusion that it was constantly increasing. Her conjecture, however, was dismissed as mere, utter nonsense and many Eternal Realm masters laughed behind her back because of it. After each round of chaos was destroyed, the Sons of Truth survived in the new one and could directly observe the most original power of the chaos, the ways blending energy. The ways blending energy of each round was constant, which proved that the snake goddess was wrong. Since the Sons of Truth had a different conclusion, the snake goddess herself was confused. According to her measurements at the time, the energy would increase by 1/3 after the end of a chaotic era. Who would have thought that some of the energy would be siphoned away when a round of chaos ended? When the primeval Lord of Heaven finished speaking, Zen was suddenly filled with admiration for her. You're truly intelligent, snake goddess. You were able to come to the same conclusion through measurement. I really admire you. The snake goddess snorted. It was a pity that nobody believed me and chose to take the side of those stupid Sons of Truth. To her, the Sons of Truth were just lucky to have been chosen by the chaos as the protectors of the next one, but in truth, they were weak and only controlled a bit of truth-level theurgies. It's all my fault. I'm sorry, the primeval Lord of Heaven said helplessly. The snake goddess merely ignored him. If this is the case, then the instant civilization wouldn't want to see the completion of the finale way. Once the chaos defeated that needle and completed the finale way, its constant cycle of destruction and rebirth would be no more. Extra energy would no longer circulate as the chaos would use it to expand outwards. In other words, that needle was arranged by the instant civilization, she muttered in finality. Upon this conclusion, Zen's and the primeval Lord of Heaven's eyes flashed. The truth had given them clarity. The destroyer was also the creator. The chaos was constantly built, developed, and destroyed. This ultimate cycle was probably not some kind of theurgy but a method of education engraved in the bloodline that told the descendants of the instant civilization how to survive. But this is only a conjecture, the primeval Lord of Heaven said. The snake goddess chose to remain silent. What he said was true. Though her words were reasonable, she had no concrete evidence to prove it. There is a way to prove it, Zen told them with a smile. So long as we find a world like chaos in the abstruse energy world, then we will be able to prove it. Chapter 3471, 4 Pillars. In the abstruse energy world. Some of the light dots froze in place, while some others continued to twirl and dance. It was surprisingly easy to express and illustrate some complicated things with light dots. For example, it only required less than 40 light dots to construct the shape of a person. On the other hand, there were some simple shapes that required innumerable light dots to create. For example, a rope was actually built by 300 to 400 light dots. In the beginning, Jeffrey had wanted to record a guide of rules to help Zia and the other warriors learn faster and adapt to the abstruse energy world more easily. After some lengthy efforts proved unsuccessful, Jeffrey chose to give up. No matter how omniscient and capable Zia was, once he entered the abstruse energy world, he became as a child, knowing nothing about the workings of that world. Even though he had such astonishing wisdom, he was now like a 3-year-old child trying to figure out the complicated light dots. Last time, after crossing the grassland, Jeffrey and Zia had found another world similar in nature to chaos. Zia had been very interested in it as if he had discovered a new continent. He became even more enthusiastic about the abstruse energy world. Since there was this second world, there must be a third and a fourth one. There were endless living creatures and clues in these worlds. After sealing off the deleting space, Zia had urged Jeffrey to continue exploring the abstruse energy world. After bypassing the mountain in the world of poisonous mist, Jeffrey had continued to move forward. A narrow mountain path led upwards, and the terrain in front of him became rugged and difficult, which had caused Jeffrey to hesitate for a moment. Although Zia was powerful, it would be difficult to deal with some of the strange creatures in the abstruse energy world. But since he had come so far, Jeffrey didn't want to retreat. He was also fascinated by this strangely familiar world. After ascending the mountain path with gritted determination, Jeffrey prepared to go up to the mountainside when he suddenly noticed a pair of red eyes not far away, burning in a face like an ape's. The creature saw Jeffrey in the same instant, and it jumped out of the crevice that ran up the mountainside. This creature was tall and strong with slender but powerful arms. Gripping a big stick in its hands, it seemed to amble over with ill intentions. More importantly, there was more than one long-armed ape. Soon, more than 10 long-armed apes jumped out from the crack in quick succession. The leading ape with long arms suddenly jumped and swung its big stick at Jeffrey. In the abstruse energy world, even these unintelligent creatures possessed a powerful and brutish strength, at least stronger than Jeffrey. Noticing that trouble was looming, Jeffrey pulled Zia behind him to the front and patted him on the shoulder. In the abstruse energy world, Jeffrey hadn't found a good way to communicate with Zia yet. The two of them had agreed that if Jeffrey encountered a crisis that he couldn't solve, he would push Zia ahead and pat him on the right shoulder to indicate he should act. When Zia felt Jeffrey's pat, his heart sank. It meant that Jeffrey was in trouble. In this state, Zia was as lost as a blind man. He couldn't use any theurgy, though he still possessed a powerful physical body and formidable strength. In front of him, a large mass of strange light dots that was quite indistinguishable swarmed over. Zia simply stretched out his hands and hacked at the mass. He had practiced this movement countless times before. Now, finally, it came in handy this time. The tall and sturdy long-armed ape in the lead didn't take Zia seriously. As it swung the wooden stick towards Zia, a dull thud sounded, but Zia's body did not move at all, like an iron tower. The ape didn't know that its blow with full strength was as nothing in Zia's eyes. Crack! Zia's palms lashed out at the ape's shoulders. As the terrifying power was exerted on its body, the ape watched in horror as its bones broke, and its entire body became compressed and ripped to pieces by a huge force. Jeffrey was also overwhelmed by the sudden destruction of the long-armed ape. In the abstruse energy world, Zia couldn't tell the strength of his opponent, so he had hit the ape with close to his full power, immediately smashing it to pieces. The bloody scene shocked the other long-armed apes in front of them. Although they were not evolved lifeforms, they were not complete idiots either. The two human beings in front of them were obviously not warriors to trifle with. They produced strange screams and disappeared into the crack in the mountainside. Having scared off the long-armed apes, Jeffrey pulled Zia along and followed after them into the crack through the mountainside. Not long after they entered the dark crack, a large cave appeared in front of them. Jeffrey's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Is this the third world? With this in mind, Jeffrey would not retreat. Without hesitation, he entered the cave with Zia in tow. The cave was not only very deep, but also massively wide. A large part of it was filled with the long-armed apes. These apes were obviously now terrified of Zia. When Jeffrey and Zia passed by, the long-armed apes curled up into a mass of trembling shapes. Of course, Jeffrey ignored them and went deeper into the cave. When the long-armed apes watched Jeffrey continue forward, their eyes filled with expectation and pity. Although their intelligence was only at a bestial level, they knew that they couldn't move deeper into the cave. All of the long-armed apes that had entered deeper into the cave before had never returned. It was an endless abyss. These two human beings would probably die if they entered. After they had walked thousands of feet along the cave, the space ahead of them suddenly changed significantly. The scattered dots of light quickly gathered in one direction, and the two of them quickly rematerialized as human shapes. What attacked you just now? Where are we? In front of Zia was another huge space, but compared to the world of poisonous mist, this place was even more desolate, or phrased differently, it was completely void. Zia and Jeffrey continued to use the grand teleportation technique. But regardless of how much distance they covered, they found no living beings. Not even a soil particle, or a blade of grass existed here. This was a completely empty world. The two of them tried to enter the other shore by way of the truth of godly way, but this didn't work either. The other shore didn't exist at all. It seems that this world is even worse off, said Zia with a grim face. The previous world of poisonous mist had basically been destroyed. The fate of only one world didn't signify anything, but the world they discovered now was in the same situation, and it was completely destroyed. All things had been destroyed here, which meant that there was massive trouble looming. The chaos would probably fall into the same situation in the end. Maybe the next world didn't suffer the same fate. Jeffrey comforted. I hope so. Jeffrey, please continue to lead the way, Zia said with a grim smile. After being in the deleting space for so many years, Zia had perfected the art of indifference, and he was not upset by much. After the two of them left the empty world, they continued to climb up the mountain path. After Jeffrey gripped the rope and dragged Zia to climb over the rugged and endless mountains, he finally saw a strange scene. Standing in the distance, 4 huge black pillars had attracted Jeffrey's attention. Everything in the abstruse energy world became the size of minuscule insects compared to these 4 black pillars, hardly worth mentioning. Everything was small in terms of size compared to these, and the black pillar's aura was also massive in comparison. Jeffrey couldn't find words for this feeling, but at first sight of the black pillars, he paused in shock. Chapter 3472, Return to the Scroll Painting. As Jeffrey stood still, gazing into the distance, Zia was confused. He couldn't tell why Jeffrey remained motionless. The dots of light changing before him left him feeling suspicious. In the past, his activities in the abstruse energy world were limited to a low-lying area, where he could observe only a few things. Thus, he was unable to distinguish between heaven and earth. Now, the countless, densely packed dots before him confused him greatly. It was completely beyond his comprehension. Whenever he tried to figure out what those dots of light were, he suddenly felt a splitting headache, as though someone had stabbed him in the head. Desperate to relieve himself of the pain, he tried to distract himself from the dots of light. Anyway, he knew it was futile to try to understand what they were. In the center of the 4 giant pillars, there seemed to be some buildings, Jeffrey pointed out. Looking far into the distance, he could faintly make out the outline of a huge palace, but it was too far away and hazy. After staring into the distance for a while, Jeffrey suddenly pulled Zia, urging him to keep moving forward. Now that he had discovered something new, Jeffrey had no plans of retreating. On the way to the 4 giant pillars, Jeffrey kept Zia's instructions in mind, cautiously searching the whole way. Other than the chaos, they had already discovered 2 other worlds, including the one with poisonous mist. It was possible they'd stumble upon other worlds on their journey. In fact, after having stayed in the abstruse energy world for so long, Jeffrey was under the illusion that these weren't real worlds. Rather, they were large caves or some sort of low-level spaces. In contrast, everything in the abstruse energy world lived in harmony. Everything contained energy. The energy in the low-level worlds, like the chaos in the world with poisonous mist, seemed to be hidden. For example, stones, water, and herbs all had energy hidden in their bodies, which needed to be activated by various methods. As for the things in the abstruse energy world, they appeared as dots of light. These dots of light seemed to be made of energy, and they seemed to be more intuitive. Of course, Jeffrey was only theorizing at this point. After all, he was able to move with ease in the abstruse energy world. But to the creatures in those worlds, the abstruse energy world was like a nightmare. After searching for some time, Jeffrey finally found the 4th world. This world was soaked in some kind of strange mercury. Spiritual sense was completely blocked by the mercury, so Zia couldn't use his spiritual sense to scan the world. Moreover, the mercury also affected the space law. The grand teleportation could only transport him over short distances. After a few attempts, it finally dawned on him that the mercury was messing with him. If he tried to explore this world further, he might have completely lost himself to the mercury. Thus, he decided to return with Jeffrey. As they explored the mercury world, Jeffrey told Zia about the 4 huge pillars and the massive palace he'd seen prior. Immediately, Zia recalled the densely packed dots of lights he'd seen, and his face lit up in excitement. To their disappointment, they didn't find anything noteworthy in the 3 worlds they'd just discovered. This couldn't possibly be a coincidence. Those worlds must have been destroyed. But this didn't answer the question as to how the chaos managed to escape this disaster. They figured they'd probably glean some more information from the 4 huge pillars. Jeffrey made up his mind. Instead of wasting time exploring those other worlds, he headed straight for the 4 huge pillars. Meanwhile, the Ouroboros in the ultimate cycle stopped spinning, and the picture in front of Zen also disappeared. But Zen's mouth still hung open in shock. It came as quite a surprise to him that the vast chaos turned out to be a mere tool that generated energy. Once he retreated from the ultimate cycle, Zen returned to the first space, where the creatures could multiply infinitely. As soon as he entered this space, he felt a chill run down his spine. Simultaneously, a strange and cold voice cut through the cold atmosphere. "Do you want to stay here?" A frightened-looking boy stared at Zen, his mouth wide open. The first time Zen entered this space, this creepy boy had chased after him the whole time. Although Zen tried to counterattack, the boy continued multiplying, generating more avatars with each second that passed. Zen was left with no choice but to escape. But now, as Zen stared down this boy, he felt the ancestry-level bloodline surging within his body, like ripples on a lake. The attributes of the ancestry-level bloodline started to change constantly, and several kinds of energy with life and destruction attributes merged together. "I can stay here," Zen said. As he spoke, he raised his index finger. Then, a small gray thing appeared on the tip of his finger, like a gray bug. The boy had been smiling mischievously, his eyes dancing playfully. However, the moment he saw the small gray bug on Zen's finger, his expression fell. Wah! With a shrill scream, the boy took a step back. He was the incarnation of the origin-level bloodline named Infinite Reproduction, and the energy of the bug on Zen's finger was completely different from the Infinite Reproduction. It could restrain the boy, so the boy had an instinctive fear of the bug. Eyes filled with fear, the boy tried to retreat. But Zen only needed to take a few strides to catch up to the boy. As he gently patted the boy on the shoulder, the bug landed on the boy's body with ease. In the blink of an eye, the boy's body began to swell like a balloon. Fist-sized bubbles dotted his skin, and he began to writhe violently. Then, he exploded into a pool of blood. Zen squatted down next to the pool and dipped his hand into it. The origin-level bloodline named Infinite Reproduction has 11 types of power in the map. If this truly is the origin-level bloodline, then the bloodline I just created must also be regarded as the same. The small gray bug suddenly emerged from the pool of blood and crawled onto his hand once more. Apparently, Zen created it instinctively. Then, he turned around abruptly to return to the stone platform of the hexagram array. He had done this before, so he assumed he just needed to retrace his steps. However, when he stepped onto the stone platform, nothing happened. Puzzled, he looked down at the stone surface beneath his feet. He sensed that the rules of space and time of the stone platform had changed somewhat. Buzz. With a slight nod, he immediately figured out what to do. The ancestry-level bloodline in his body surged again, transforming accordingly to one with space-time attribute. Then, a stream of energy flowed down his arms, then legs, until it passed from his toes and onto the stone platform. Suddenly, the stone platform lit up, and Zen vanished into thin air. Chapter 3473, Meeting. The moment Zen disappeared from the stone platform, he felt the ancestry-level bloodline in his body surging once more. At the same time, he finally understood the composition of energy in the hexagram array. The first time Zen was teleported in, he didn't feel the power of the space fluctuation. However, that didn't mean the power didn't exist. It just meant that, at the time, Zen wasn't able to understand it. Now that the ancestry-level bloodline surged within him, Zen instantly understood the power of space within the hexagram array. In fact, it was not one, but two kinds of power of space that were combined in such a way that they offset each other. Upon returning to the eternal scroll painting, Zen was once again pressed into a picture. Then, a huge vortex appeared before him. There are two more lines here, Zen observed as he took a few steps forward. He had arrived at the very center of the huge vortex of the eternal scroll painting. Since ancient times till the present, Zen was the sole being who had entered this place. Who else could have left these two lines here? Zen walked forward cautiously, wrought with confusion. The instant he stepped between the two thin lines, they shot upwards until the two lines were floating above the huge vortex. Unwittingly, Zen had activated a path that stretched above the vortex, extending into the distance. Zen broke free from the plane and climbed to the top of the eternal scroll painting. From there, he saw that the path headed straight to the second page of the eternal scroll painting. That is where the fox girl was, he muttered to himself. Generally speaking, Someone who had obtained a bloodline from the eternal scroll painting would return to the grand plane stage through the vortex. Now that the eternal scroll painting had been closed, it was impossible for Zen to return to the other shore through that normal way. He had no choice but to come up with another solution. Previously, the fox girl had insisted that he take an origin-level bloodline. If he didn't, she would kill him. Now that he had managed to obtain the ancestry-level bloodline, he figured the fox girl wouldn't make any attempt to kill him. Bearing that in mind, Zen relaxed a bit. He continued along the path towards the second page of the eternal scroll painting with ease. The second Zen stepped foot onto the eternal scroll painting, the brush wielder sensed his presence and provided the path specifically for him. "He's back," the smiling face of the brush wielder said. The fox girl frowned. So soon? Did he fail? It was definitely not easy to obtain an origin-level bloodline. As a matter of fact, the fox girl had settled into thinking that it'd take Zen decades, or even a century, before he successfully obtained an origin-level bloodline. She had even gone so far as to entertain the thought that Zen would die there and would never return. Only a short time had passed since Zen left. Naturally, she was suspicious he had returned unsuccessful. The brush wielder continued, "Anyway, I've drawn a path to guide him here." "Are you going to speak to him face to face?" asked the fox girl, raising an eyebrow. The brush wielder was the manager of the passages. He had never personally faced any creature on the other shore. Usually, the fox girl handled these sorts of things. "It doesn't matter anymore," the brush wielder sighed emotionally. Then the crying face continued, "Many rules have been broken. If we continue to abide by the rules, we might as well draw a circle on the ground to serve as a prison for ourselves." With that, the fox girl fell silent. Over the years, the brush wielder seldom showed his face to anyone. It seemed he had placed his hopes on Zen. With ease, Zen continued along the path that was set for him. The moment he stepped onto the second page of the eternal scroll painting, the fox girl and the brush wielder appeared before him. Since this was the second time he encountered the fox girl, he greeted her politely. As for her crying companion, Zen didn't have a clue as to who he was. Naturally, he looked at him vigilantly. It seemed this character had something to do with the eternal scroll painting, but Zen was at a loss as to how exactly. "Zen?" the brush wielder asked. Zen nodded cautiously, cupping his hands politely. "May I know who you are?" Suddenly, the brush wielder's sullen face beamed happily. It was now a smiling face in front of him. "I am the brush wielder." As he spoke, he summoned a huge ink brush in the air. When Zen's eyes landed on the ink brush, his eyes flashed with understanding. "Are the lines in the eternal scroll painting drawn by you?" "Yes," the brush wielder replied. "It can also be said that everything here is created by me." The eternal scroll painting served as a special passage, thus the brush wielder served as the master of this special passage. "I see." The light suddenly broke in upon not only Zen but also the human heroes such as the primeval Lord of Heaven. They were also interested in the constantly emerging lines within the eternal scroll painting. They knew that there should be an invisible existence over the eternal scroll painting, but none of them had ever seen the true appearance of such an existence. It could be said that they were slightly in awe to be in the presence of the brush wielder. "Have you gotten an origin-level bloodline?" the fox girl suddenly cut in. She was not the type to waste time. Anxious to find out, she decidedly interrupted their conversation. Zen smiled faintly. "I think I did." "What do you mean by, you think?" the fox girl asked coldly. "I can't pretend to have obtained one if I haven't, right?" Zen asked, raising a brow mischievously. "Then show me," the fox girl demanded impatiently. The only way Zen could do so was to demonstrate the power of the bloodline he had obtained, which was something he couldn't do in the eternal scroll painting. Spreading out his hands, Zen said helplessly, "I'm afraid I can't use it in this form." Although Zen was standing upright in the eternal scroll painting, he was still two-dimensional. This hampered his abilities. "Then turn into your normal form and let me see," the fox girl ordered. Impatient, she wanted to expose his lie as soon as possible. Thus, the two of them entered a room of hexagram array and returned to their normal forms. The fox girl's flawless fair face exuded a cold aura. "You can prove it now." Zen studied her expression. It seemed she was willing to kill him on the spot if he failed to prove her wrong. "First of all, there is something you need to know," Zen said. "I want to see your bloodline Thurgy." "Now," the fox girl said through gritted teeth, obviously running out of patience with every second that passed. She was under the impression he was stalling for time. Behind the 4 origin-level bloodlines, there is a stronger bloodline, which is called the ancestry-level bloodline, Zen continued with a mischievous smile. The ancestry-level bloodline in the eternal divine courtyard is the origin of all bloodlines, and the 4 origin-level bloodlines also originate from the ancestry-level bloodline. The fox girl remained expressionless. Instead, the killing intent in her eyes intensified tenfold. One last chance, Zen. Show me your bloodline Thurgy right this instant. Just as the fox girl was about to attack Zen, the astonished voice of the brush wielder suddenly came from above. How do you know the ancestry-level bloodline? And the eternal divine courtyard? Were you able to enter that square? Even the fox girl didn't know about the ancestry-level bloodline, nor was she aware of the existence of the eternal divine courtyard. She had been told that there were 4 origin-level bloodlines at the end of the eternal scroll painting. Zen's words stirred up a storm in the heart of the brush wielder as he stared at him intently from above. Chapter 3474, Display of Abilities. The fox girl looked at Zen with confusion when she heard the panic in the brush wielder's voice. She had learned everything she knew about the eternal scroll painting from the brush wielder. He had said there were only 4 origin-level bloodlines in the center of the eternal scroll painting and she believed him. That was why she now thought Zen spoke absolute nonsense. But the brush wielder's response perplexed her and filled her with doubt. Perhaps Zen was not lying. Yes, I entered it, Zen replied honestly. Of course, he could have kept this to himself as the fox girl's request only involved an origin-level bloodline and he was able to display an origin-level bloodline Thurgy with ease. But his trip to the eternal scroll painting had raised too many questions for him. It was obvious that the brush wielder and the fox girl hoped he would grow stronger. And he wished to get more information from the brush wielder, so he was willing to share some of his secrets. Zen's answer caused the brush wielder's crying face to tremble suddenly and flip it to a smiling face instead. Then you have given it a try? Inquired the smiling face. Obtaining an origin-level bloodline was very difficult and the brush wielder had high hopes that Zen would be able to do so. As the ruler of the eternal scroll painting, he not only guarded the passage in the chaos but also controlled the passages in other worlds. Because of this, he knew better than anyone else how difficult it was to obtain an origin-level bloodline. The creatures in these worlds were born with defects. If they obtained a root-level bloodline, they would be considered one of the top masters, but if they obtained an origin-level bloodline, they would be able to dominate a world. As for the ancestry-level bloodline, it was not meant for the creatures of these worlds. It was the foundation of the existence of the 4 spirits sect and even their talents had great difficulty in getting the opportunity to enter the sacred cup. As far as the brush wielder could remember, very few creatures were able to enter the eternal divine courtyard, and even fewer had succeeded in merging with the ancestry-level bloodline. I tried, Zen answered. Did you succeed? Pressed the brush wielder, his voice urgent. He didn't seem to be breathing. If he did he would probably do so quite heavily. Zen stretched his hand towards the fox girl who stood opposite him and a gray aura surged out. It turned into a sharp claw with razor-sharp fingertips and grabbed at her. The fox girl had a keen sense that Zen would not kill her, but when she felt the terrifyingly destructive aura emanating from the sharp claw, her soft face lost all its color and turned pale. Da, 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 her snow-white bare feet skipped across the ground as she retreated to the edge of the wall. She was clearly rattled and frightened, with her arms crossed and her chest heaving as she gasped for breath. Right from the start, she had been aggressive and overbearing. Zen's sudden attack would mean punishment. He had casually used his bloodline to combine 3 kinds of energy with the destruction attribute and 2 kinds with the life attribute. This combination of energy was not all that powerful, but it was incredibly intimidating and could cause an extremely powerful spiritual pressure. Well, what sort of ability is that? The brush wielder was now even more taken aback. Zen had not displayed just one single ability, but a combination of several. This meant he had not only merged with the ancestry-level bloodline, but also possessed its multitude of abilities. Generally speaking, the combination of multiple abilities would only result in 4 abilities: infinite reproduction, myriad birth and destruction, ultimate cycle and infinite time and space. These 4 abilities were separated from the ancestry-level bloodline, meaning they were made up of more than 10 kinds of energy from the ancestry-level bloodline, combined in different ways. However, the origin-level bloodline and the ancestry-level bloodline were not the same thing, so the talents of the 4 spirits sect still scrambled for the ancestry-level bloodline. Even if they could only obtain one form of energy by merging with it, it would still be much stronger than an origin-level bloodline. Those who were able to obtain 2 or more abilities of the ancestry-level bloodline were the most blessed in the 4 spirits sect. Such people were few and far between, even for them. Of course, the brush wielder already understood this. But when he had witnessed Zen's demonstration of such a strange ability, he had not considered all that. Instead, He wondered which form of energy among the 373 forms was this powerful. It's the combination of the 6th, the 7th and the 57th kinds of energy from the destruction area and the 1st and 33rd kinds of energy from the life area, Zen revealed. He then allowed himself a slight smile when he saw the pale face of the fox girl. This ability has no name yet. Let's call it energy intimidation, for now. The fox girl was still at a loss for words and the brush wielder fell silent as well. Zen had really and truly obtained the ancestry-level bloodline. This alone was far beyond the brush wielder's expectations. It should have been good news, but his sudden, terrifying display of the combination of 5 abilities left the brush wielder stunned and speechless. Even when the Four Spirits sect was at its peak, only a tiny fraction had obtained multiple abilities. What was more, Zen seemed to imply that he had created the ability on the fly simply to intimidate the fox girl. He had merged with more than 5 abilities, and was able to use them at will. This was beyond what the brush wielder understood. He would need some time to come to grips with it all. Zen noticed the fox girl had been scared silly and now looked uncharacteristically pitiful. He withdrew the sharp gray claw and comforted her. To be honest, this thing only looks scary. It's not actually all that terrifying. As he spoke, a green light, made up of 3 abilities of life attribute, flashed on his fingertip. It surrounded the fox girl in a warm energy. The cold feeling of falling into an icy cave disappeared and was replaced with a bathing of her heart in a spring wind. You are able to use the abilities bestowed by the ancestry-level bloodline freely. How many? 20, 30? Asked the brush wielder, his voice trembling. The fox girl blinked her big eyes in surprise. The brush wielder was not himself today. He seemed so agitated. Zen had just shown the abilities of the ancestry-level bloodline. The smile on his face now vanished as he barked angrily, "You required me to obtain an origin-level bloodline and I went beyond what you had expected. If you wish to know how many abilities I have obtained, answer my questions first." Too much confusion had accumulated within him. The primeval Lord of Heaven had once been able to answer most of his questions, and the Heavenly Obsession civilization had answered the rest. But it seemed this was always the way it went. The more he knew, the more ignorant he felt. The way ahead seemed carved out by riddles, and the further he walked, the more questions he had. Even the primeval Lord of Heaven was unable to explain much of what now took place. Chapter 3475, Threshold. The brush wielder didn't experience what Zen had gone through, so he wondered why Zen had asked such a question. In any case, he now thought even more highly of Zen since the latter had obtained the ancestry-level bloodline. "Tell me, what do you want to know?" "I will tell you everything I know," he said. Zen looked up and asked, "What is the Four Spirits sect? Are they the founders of the instant civilization?" It seemed that every secret was related to the instant civilization, which in turn was closely connected to the Four Spirits sect. Thus, he wanted to know the connection between them. "Since you've already been to the Eternal Divine Courtyard, you should have known that it was the 4 Holy Spirits who formed the Four Spirits sect. They are invincible beings in the outer world. They can create everything, as well as destroy everything. They are the creators, and the annihilators as well," said the brush wielder. The 4 Holy Spirits were human spirit, monkey spirit, snake spirit, and bird spirit. In a broad sense, it was difficult to tell if the Four Spirits sect was good or evil. The instant civilization you referred to should be the creator of the chaos. They indeed belong to the Four Spirits sect, but they are only a small branch, he continued. As the Four Spirits sect developed and expanded, they were divided into many factions, and each of them had a clear division of work. For instance, some of them were pioneers, responsible for exploring new worlds, annihilators, responsible for killing other creatures, others were creators who built secondary worlds, and many more. The instant civilization you've mentioned should be the world builders of the Four Spirits sect. Among them, human spirits have the largest population, he explained. In turn, Zen quietly lowered his head and thought deeply. The brush wielder's answer was quite close to his guess. Then, he asked, "The world builders have built more than one world of chaos, right?" "Yes," the brush wielder nodded. "Did they build those worlds for the sole purpose of obtaining energy?" Zen recalled that it was what he had witnessed in the space of the ultimate cycle. "Yes," the brush wielder nodded again. "The creatures in secondary worlds are quite weak, but they are in large number. After a new world is created, and once its time is accelerated, lots of extra energy will overflow. The Four Spirits sect needs such energy for its expansion," he added. A secondary world could produce astronomical amounts of energy in one whole chaotic era. The Four Spirits sect had built dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of such worlds. Then why should they end those worlds? Isn't it better to let the worlds continue to grow stronger? Zen asked with a frown. The pictures in the space of the ultimate cycle answered some of his questions, but they didn't quell his doubts. There are too many secondary worlds. If they continued to exist, they would eventually threaten the status of the Four Spirits sect at some point. Furthermore, extracting the energy of a world will only cause violent turmoil. After careful consideration, they concluded that destroying the secondary worlds and building them over again is the best solution, the brush wielder answered. Besides, the Four Spirits sect didn't just enforce their rules on a whim. Everyone regarded that as the best solution after countless years of exploration and experiments. Aside from the rules, the time span of a chaotic era, the size of the primitive land, and so on were also included. All of those were decided after a long period of attempts and experience. You mean they are afraid that the creatures of the secondary worlds will threaten the status of the Four Spirits sect? Zen asked. The creatures of our world can't even understand the space and time in the abstruse energy world. How is it possible for us to pose any threat to the Four Spirits sect? He said with a wry smile. Upon hearing those words, the brush wielder paused for a moment and asked, have you ever been to the abstruse energy world you mentioned? According to what he knew, the Three Purities stage should be the only exit to the outside of the chaos. Therefore, Zen couldn't leave the chaos before he entered the eternal scroll painting. Yes, Zen admitted honestly. Is there any other way out of the chaos? He asked in astonishment. Sorry, but I can't tell you about that, Zen said and shrugged. Zen could tell the brush wielder everything about the eternal divine courtyard since the brush wielder himself was the ruler of the eternal scroll painting. However, he wouldn't reveal anything about the fact that he had entered the abstruse energy world through the deleting space. The brush wielder didn't pursue the matter anymore. He just said, it's true that creatures of the secondary worlds can't survive outside the chaos. However, that doesn't mean that they can't threaten the Four Spirits sect. The Four Spirits sect never united as a whole, and they always had severe internal conflicts. The world builders initially did not impose restrictions on the first secondary worlds. They allowed those worlds to develop freely, which resulted in the birth of many strange and powerful creatures. Most of those new creatures joined the Four Spirits sect, but the others refused to submit. Instead, they connived with the traitors in the Four Spirits sect, which in turn caused chaos. After that, the Four Spirits sect restricted the development of the secondary worlds. In other words, they restarted the secondary worlds, and at the same time, extracted their energy once in a while. Still, there were many talented creatures born in the secondary worlds. Of course, it would be a big waste even for the Four Spirits sect if all those creatures got destroyed along with the secondary worlds. Therefore, the world builders came up with a remedial plan to make up for their loss. They added another shore on top of every secondary world. The other shore was like a fishing net that collected the biggest fish for them. Then, the strongest warriors in the secondary worlds would eventually enter the eternal scroll painting. A few of them might manage to reach the deepest part of the eternal scroll painting, then they would step into the eternal divine courtyard, and finally join the Four Spirits sect. If all the secondary worlds still operated like normal and the eternal divine courtyard hadn't been abandoned yet, then Zen might have already joined the Four Spirits sect by now. However, the Four Spirits sect had undergone drastic changes, which gave him the chance to obtain the complete ancestry-level bloodline and come back safe and sound. All those happened by sheer luck. So that is the real use of the other shore, he muttered. The primeval Lord of Heaven, the real Snake Goddess, and the rest were all lost in thought. After a while, the Snake Goddess remarked ironically, looks like we're too weak to even meet the threshold of the Four Spirits sect. All of the Eternal Realm warriors on the other shore were powerful enough to dominate a chaotic era. Especially during the chaotic era of the human race, where countless warriors in the Eternal Realm emerged like mushrooms after the rain. Yet, it still took them a lot of effort to obtain a root-level bloodline, not to mention the origin-level bloodline or even the ancestry-level bloodline in the Eternal Divine Courtyard. The Snake Goddess, the primeval Lord of Heaven, and Fuxi were all arrogant. After all, they represented the human race, and each of them had dominated a great starry region before. They rarely encountered someone on par with them in the 77th Chaos, or at any other time in over 1,000 rounds of Chaos. Despite that, they all felt disheartened upon hearing what the brush wielder had said. It turned out that although they had reached the Eternal Realm, they still didn't meet the threshold set by the Four Spirits sect. Naturally, they felt dejected. Chapter 3476, The Destination of the Key. Zen was reminded by the Snake Goddess's words. Then, he asked the brush wielder, there is still one thing that I don't understand. According to what you said, the Four Spirits sect will only recruit those who have entered the eternal divine courtyard. But more than 1,000 chaotic eras have passed, and it looks like I'm the only one who entered. Isn't that too high a threshold? In the current round of chaos, the only other person who had fused with the strongest bloodline was the Ice Spirit. Yet, even he had failed to reach the last room in the past. If the other shore was surely a mechanism built to select talents for the Four Spirits sect, it was a bit absurd for it to be so strict. The current Four Spirits sect is no longer what it used to be. You should have known something about that in the Eternal Divine Courtyard, the brush wielder said. Zen nodded thoughtfully. The Eternal Divine Courtyard was known as the main center of the Four Spirits sect. If they had abandoned even such an important center, then it wasn't hard to imagine what major crisis the Four Spirits sect had undergone. He started to wonder if this force still existed. I've already answered your question. Now you should tell me how many light columns appeared when you integrated with the ancestry-level bloodline, the brush wielder said. After all, that was what the brush wielder was most concerned about. All of them, replied Zen. What do you mean? The brush wielder was confused at Zen's words for a moment. All 373 kinds. The bloodline map on the square was completely activated. I've fused with the complete ancestry-level bloodline, Zen explained nonchalantly. The truth was that even he didn't get why he obtained the complete ancestry-level bloodline. He was no less curious and confused than the brush wielder. He had discussed the problem with the primeval Lord of Heaven on his way back to the eternal scroll painting from the Eternal Divine Courtyard. He tried to figure it out, but he didn't find any clues that could lead to the truth. As for the brush wielder, he fell silent again after hearing Zen's answer. The fox girl beside him blinked with confusion. She could sense the unusual emotions from the brush wielder. The complete bloodline map. As far as I know, no one in the Four Spirits sect has ever managed to activate it. They couldn't even activate a complete single quadrant, the brush wielder murmured. There were a total of 4 quadrants on the bloodline map, which included the destruction quadrant, the life quadrant, the creation quadrant and the space-time quadrant. If any of them was fully activated, the result would undoubtedly be an immensely strong bloodline. However, to initiate even a single quadrant required more than 90 light columns to be activated. Someone in the Four Spirits sect had used a unique method to achieve this, but not when they were merging with the ancestry-level bloodline. Therefore, the brush wielder concluded that it was a nearly impossible task. Since he also didn't see it for himself, Zen's words sounded absurd to him. How will you prove that? He asked further. In reality, the truth of the matter made no difference to him, but it was something he had never heard of, so he couldn't help but feel curious. In turn, Zen blinked and thought for a while. First of all, he couldn't use the complete ancestry-level bloodline at his will. Second, his control over it wasn't that good ever since he had merged with it. Most of the time, the ancestry-level bloodline only worked automatically to help him. For example, it could help him identify the composition of all energies, or adjust the kinds of energies he used to restrain those of his opponents. After thinking for a while, he stretched out his hand. With a surge of the ancestry-level bloodline inside his body, a specific type of energy suddenly appeared in his palm. That was the first kind of energy in the life quadrant. Afterward, that energy continually changed. It changed from the first kind to the second, the third, then the fourth. Meanwhile, the brush wielder observed the ever-changing energy in Zen's palm for a long while. Finally, he let out a short, wry laugh and said, no wonder you can freely combine the abilities of the bloodline. How did you obtain all the abilities on the map? He had once controlled all the passageways to the Eternal Divine Courtyard, so he had seen a lot of talents from different secondary worlds. However, no matter how amazing and extraordinary they were, none of them achieved the same thing as Zen. Furthermore, even the geniuses of the Four Spirits sect couldn't do that as well. It was a miracle that such a thing happened to Zen. I don't know, Zen answered earnestly. Both the brush wielder and the fox girl were rendered speechless. They exchanged silent looks and wondered how they should react. In any case, Zen had greatly exceeded the expectations of the brush wielder no matter what. Of course, that boosted his confidence in the future. Sir, may I leave now? Zen asked. He had stayed in the eternal scroll painting for too long, and he didn't want to waste any more time in the place. Of course you can, the brush wielder nodded, but I have one more thing to tell you. Please go ahead, Zen said without much surprise. During his journey from the Soul City to the Land of Bone Tribulation, then to the Eternal Scroll Painting, he had sensed that things had gone too smoothly for him. It felt like everything had played out in a well-planned way. Thus, he didn't believe that all of these happened only by sheer luck. Still, no matter where all of these led him, they helped him grow stronger in the process. Therefore, he decided not to go against it for the time being. The brush wielder was one part of the plot. Since he had passed through the eternal scroll painting, Zen decided to know everything he could from him. "You've got a key in the Soul City, haven't you?" the brush wielder asked. Yes, Zen nodded. Many people knew that Zen had entered the room at the top of the Soul City, so he couldn't be bothered to hide it. "After you enter the Three Purities stage, take the key to the center of the Jade Pure Realm," the brush wielder said. The center of the Jade Pure Realm? Zen arched an eyebrow in surprise. "Yes, that's the core area of the Three Purities stage," the brush wielder added. The primeval Lord of Heaven and the others also seemed astonished at the information. If the entire other shore were to be divided into two parts, the first 32 stages would be the first half, and the Three Purities stage alone would be the other half. Perhaps the Three Purities stage wasn't large, but every other shore token that came from it was far more powerful than those in the first 32 stages. Naturally, it was more dangerous there as well. Now, even the Grand Pure Realm was much dangerous, let alone the Supreme Pure Realm. As for the Jade Pure Realm, very few people, including those from the ruling forces, entered that area throughout all chaotic eras. Even the Element Spirit civilization, who was said to have occupied the Three Purities stage, didn't know much about the Jade Pure Realm. As for the center of the Jade Pure Realm, it meant the innermost part of the Three Purities stage. The primeval Lord of Heaven didn't know what was inside there, or what kind of danger awaited them in that place. "What will I find there? Is it a door that needs a key?" Zen asked with a smile. To his surprise, the brush wielder nodded. "You're right, it's a door buried in the ground. You have to open it," he exclaimed. "What's inside it?" Zen asked curiously. "Someone will answer you after you open it," the brush wielder replied. "But I don't have to open it. Maybe it's not necessarily a good thing for me. So, you have to tell me what's in there," Zen shot back with a smile. Despite his threat, the brush wielder did not seem to care at all. Then, he floated up in the air and said in an ethereal voice, "You will go there anyway. This world is the last Pure Land. You won't just stand by and watch this Pure Land collapse. Since he has blessed you, you cannot escape this fate." Soon enough, the brush wielder disappeared from his view and left the fox girl behind, who still stared at him in disbelief. Chapter 3477, Explosion. The fox girl stared up at Zen with a faint smile. "Actually, there is something that you don't need to know so clearly." Zen scoffed. "Are you willing to just be a chess piece?" he asked her. The fox girl tutted, but there was a trace of envy in her eyes as she looked at him. "Even so, you're the most important chess piece," she told him. In fact, not many people were qualified to become chess pieces in the game in the first place. Zen, however, found no honor in this. "I don't want to be a chess piece," he said. "I want to be the player." "The player," the fox girl repeated with a smile. "Those who played chess and those who watched by the sidelines have all died. There is no player now. Nobody can control you. It's all up to you." She was able to get the knowledge of the Four Spirits sect from the brush wielder. The chaos was never the main battlefield but just a lucky survivor of the fiercer wars that occurred outside it. The war within the Four Spirit sect, however, will ultimately affect the chaos, so it must continue in another way. "You are the key figure on one side of this war," she explained. Zen had an idea which side it was. "The side of the finale way?" She nodded in confirmation. Yes, of course, even if she didn't tell Zen, he and the primeval Lord of Heaven would be able to reach the same conclusion through deduction. However, there was one more thing Zen wanted to know. Who was the leader of the opposite side? The fox girl merely shrugged. "I have no idea. The brush wielder has hidden this information for his reasons. Don't think about it too much. Anyway, I'll be sending you out." As they followed the path drawn by the brush wielder, the fox girl and Zen eventually returned to the edge of the third page. Since the eternal scroll painting had already closed, it meant that this passageway was now closed. However, since everything here was controlled by the brush wielder, it wasn't too difficult for him to open up a temporary exit. Since the closing of the eternal scroll painting, the entire Grand Plain stage had returned to its former peace, though the aura of killing intent was heavy in the air. A piece of news floated about. The Nihility race and the Element Spirit race were finally able to grasp the method of descent and were now able to transfer the battlefield to the chaos. Buzz. Whoosh. A light column fell from the first volume of the eternal scroll painting that floated in the air, and smashed onto the bronze ground of the Grand Plain stage, where the three Purities stones were situated. It was only a flash of light, but it attracted attention just the same. Many other shore creatures quickly gathered around the area to check what exactly was going on. As he moved his body around, Zen felt a sort of connection. When he looked back at his statues on the Three Purities stone, he felt that he was connected to them by blood. Through the anchor bodies, Zen was able to connect to the power from the abstruse energy world. While Zen crawled out of the bronze ground, he found a few creatures scattered about, their eyes wide with shock as they looked at him. It's that human, he's not dead. Does this mean that he also reached the eternal realm? I have to go back and report this. Before the eternal scroll painting opened, Zen managed to leave a deep impression onto the other shore races in the Grand Plain stage. Even those who were on the neutral side began to attach great importance to him. A few of the creatures intended to report this matter to their respective leaders right away, while a couple of them decided to approach Zen first and ask him what happened. However, Zen had no time to answer their inquiries. He was too worried about the Oneness Sky Palace, so without any pause, he began to recite the illusion-breaking rune. From above, a lightning dragon appeared and nosedived to the ground before it disappeared without a trace. Soon enough, the land within a 10,000-mile radius from where it disappeared turned a charred black. Boom! Terrifying lighting broke through the earth as huge rocks and mountains were thrown into the air along with the snake goddess and Fuxi. The two of them looked very miserable. The Grand Master of Heaven was one of the biggest crises they'd ever met. Whoosh! A mountain soared past them under the force of lighting and blocked the snake goddess and Fuxi. Fuxi circled his hands and the 8 diagrams disc rotated above his head. Help me, he shouted desperately. The snake goddess nodded. Okay. She sat cross-legged in midair and a shadow that mirrored the same gesture appeared behind her. Energy beams emanated from her and turned into thin needles that stabbed towards Fuxi. Puff, puff, puff. Once the needles pierced into Fuxi's body, the shadow of snake goddess quickly deflated. Buzz. A flash of red light glinted in Fuxi's eyes and the 8 diagrams disc above him rotated at an impossibly fast rate. Suddenly, Fuxi's aura began to increase dramatically. The snake goddess's face also flashed with a fierce expression as the power of her bloodline also served and replenished her shadow's energy. This secret technique served to enhance Fuxi's strength. Drawing out the power of her bloodline would cause great damage to her, but it was worth it if it meant that they would get out of this alive. Her face paled and aged in a matter of seconds while her eyes, which used to be filled with wisdom, also dimmed. Boom! As the purple lightning split the mountain, the Grand Master of Heaven reappeared. He gave them a sinister smile. You should be proud for having resisted this long, however, this is your last. Before he could finish his words, a mark of 8 diagrams appeared on his body. This mark was surrounded by a circle of ominous, blood-red light. Boom! Fuxi bid his time, and now, the power of his palm had increased several times, especially with the snake goddess's help. The Grand Master of Heaven's body flew away upon contact with Fuxi's overpowered palm. Of course, Fuxi knew one strike wasn't going to defeat him. Again. He and the snake goddess quickly teleported and reappeared above the Grand Master of Heaven's body. Buzz! Another blood-red mark of 8 diagrams appeared on his body. In such a passive position, the Grand Master of Heaven reflexively raised Zen's body on his shoulder. The mark of 8 diagrams was then transferred to Zen's body. Just as Fuxi was about to deal his attack, he stopped upon seeing the mark on Zen's body. The snake goddess behind him frowned at the sight of this. Had Zen's body undergone a new change? How did this happen? Zen's body had previously been a black hole that sucked in any sort of energy laid on him. Since the mark of 8 diagrams was also a type of energy, it should have been absorbed by him. How did it end up imprinted on his body? Could he no longer absorb energy? A trace of confusion also appeared in the Grand Master of Heaven's eyes. He had personally come for Zen and he wouldn't want to see him die in Fuxi's hands. As he thought about it for a while, the Grand Master of Heaven decided to throw Zen into his fishing drum, where he had also previously thrown the chaos ancient god named Othniel. This fishing drum was a spatial treasure filled with the power of space, and Zen should have been able to absorb the power within it due to his special body. However, since he had lost this ability now, he would naturally be absorbed into the fishing drum. Chapter 3478, Break. Being tricked and trapped in the fishing drum by the Grand Master of Heaven filled Othniel with hatred and anger. In a rage, he activated his bloodline power in an attempt to break free from the heart-piercing lock. He was the master of the truth after all. Was this guy so powerful that he could defy even the truth? Othniel was unconvinced. He didn't believe such a ridiculous freak existed in the chaos. He had been trapped for some time when something flashed in the distance and another figure flew in. It was Zen. He appeared to still be unconscious, floating aimlessly in the space. Othniel sighed helplessly as he looked on at this new trophy of the Grand Master of Heaven. Even with no Chaos Ancient God to support them, the Nihility race had still come out of this battle totally victorious. As Othniel was growing more and more upset, Zen suddenly opened his eyes. Zen's real body was still in the Oneness Sky Palace when he entered the Eternal Scroll painting from the Grand Plain stage. He had his concerns for the Oneness Sky Palace but assumed not too much could happen in a short period of time. However, he opened his eyes to find that he was not in the Flow Sword sect, but in some strange space. If circumstances were normal, the people of the Oneness Sky Palace would not move him. If they were left with no choice but to move him, they must have suffered something catastrophic. These thoughts began racing through his mind when he felt there was someone behind him. He turned around and saw Othniel. "Mount?" Zen queried, raising his eyebrows. The Othniel in front of him was in human form and looked exactly the same as the Mount he had encountered before. Naturally, at a glance, Zen recognized him as Mount. "No, you're not Mount. You're much stronger. You are the Chaos Ancient God Othniel." This person before him had an aura incomprehensibly stronger than Mount's. It was impossible for him to have improved his strength to such a level, no matter how fast he worked. Zen knew the relationship between Mount and Othniel very well and so quickly surmised that this was in fact Othniel in front of him. "So what?" snorted Othniel. He treated Zen as simply the loot of the Grand Master of Heaven. They were trapped here with no possibility of getting out and so he reacted unpleasantly in his unhappiness. "Where are we? Why am I here with you?" Zen asked curiously. Othniel glanced over at him with a hint of pity in his eyes. It seemed as though Zen still didn't understand the situation he was in. "This is a space treasure," said Othniel flatly, "the space treasure of the Grand Master of Heaven to be exact. He's trapped you here." "The space treasure of the Grand Master of Heaven?" Zen's face changed and his voice trembled slightly with nervousness. "The Grand Master of Heaven, he's descended to the chaos." Zen knew Fuxi had handed the golden red chaotic source spirits over to the black ship, but would the Grand Master of Heaven really descend to the chaos so soon? Did he land at the Bloom Divine Province? This change in Zen brought joy to Othniel's heart. He then couldn't help himself and blurted out, "Bloom Divine Province. The Oneness Sky Palace is gone. How could he possibly have landed on the Bloom Divine Province? The Oneness Sky Palace is gone." Zen's face darkened and his voice seemed distant, lost in his thoughts. "My guess is that anyone left from the Oneness Sky Palace is dead. I wonder whether the two old fellows, Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasmin, have died." "You know what, they're probably dead too," Othniel said mockingly. Zen burned with anger at these words. He hadn't expected such a horror to befall the Oneness Sky Palace once he entered the Eternal Scroll painting. "Anger is useless. Even I can't break free from the heart-piercing lock and all you can do is stay here and do nothing," Othniel remarked as he stretched his hand out and pulled at the chain at his chest which sealed the space truth. "Heart-piercing lock?" Zen looked down at himself and said, "I don't have any chains on me." "What?" Othniel exclaimed perplexed. He then realized Zen had been unconscious and so the Grand Master of Heaven probably didn't think about it too much when he threw him into the fishing drum. Zen was not trapped by the heart-piercing lock. But, as fast as this little glimmer of hope appeared, it disappeared just as quickly. The fishing drum itself was also an extremely powerful space treasure. Even if he was in his best condition, it would still require some great thurgies to break it. This was impossible for Zen with his current strength. He might be able to break the heart-piercing lock for him, but the lock was under the Grand Master of Heaven's control. The slightest movement would alert him so that wouldn't work either. Both Othniel and Zen observed each other closely. Zen saw the subtle changes in Othniel at this news, he could see how eager he was to escape this place. He thought it through and asked, "Does the Grand Master of Heaven carry this fishing drum on him?" "I think so," answered Othniel. "If I help you get out, can you take care of the Grand Master of Heaven?" Zen asked, serious and hopeful. Othniel and the Grand Master of Heaven were enemies too. Since he had trapped Othniel, it must mean they were against each other. "You, get me out, I think you've underestimated this place," Othniel said with a cheeky smile. He believed it impossible for Zen to pull it off. But his eyes festered with hatred and he said, "But if I do get out, I'll tear that guy to pieces, no doubt." Underestimated. Zen then unfurled a finger and waved it gently and a hint of space fluctuation spread from his fingertip. Othniel rolled his eyes when he felt it. As the Son of Truth in charge of the entire space in the chaos, anyone using the space thurgy in front of him was but a jester juggling before a king. This human brat knew who he was and still dared attempt this. He was too full of himself. "Don't waste your energy. You can't break the fishing drum," Othniel said disdainfully. But then, a ripple appeared in this strange space inside the fishing drum. The entire space sank in towards Zen's fingertip and then spread out in all directions. What? Othniel's eyes widened in disbelief. Ordinary beings would not have been able to understand what he had done, but Othniel was so sensitive to space that he immediately understood that he had changed the state of the space within the fishing drum in an instant. He was actually capable of controlling a top space treasure quickly and effortlessly. This was not something a human should be able to do. Even he could only break the fishing drum by force. Controlling the space treasure from the inner space would take ages. Now do you believe that I can get you out? Zen asked solemnly. I can help you remove those chains as well, but you have to help me deal with the Grand Master of Heaven once you're out. You can break the heart-piercing lock too. Othniel was still in shock, and truthfully, a little confused by all this. Although he still did not believe it, this time he was not so highly skeptical as he was before. It'll be easy. With a blank face, Zen approached Othniel. The ancestry-level bloodline in his body began to surge and the 3 chains disintegrated at his fingertip. Chapter 3479, Trap Everyone. Othniel stared at Zen in horror, as if he was looking straight at a monster. He was practically speechless. It was only then that he finally realized why Yellow Thirk was so eager to take Zen away and why the element spirit race was so determined to get him. Othniel swallowed thickly as he muttered a question to this horrifying freak in front of him. How did you make it? Zen shot him an indifferent glance. Why should I tell you? You can go out now. Although he had fused with the ancestry-level bloodline, Zen's use of the blood was still limited in the usage of the inter-restriction properties between energies. If worse came to worst and he had to fight head-on with beings like Othniel and Grand Master of Heaven, then he might not be able to make it. Since he did not know much about what was happening outside, he needed to use Othniel's power. The Grand Master of Heaven was too busy fighting with the snake goddess and Fuxi that he didn't notice Zen sneakily changing the state of space in the fishing drum. This change of space cut off the connection between the Grand Master of Heaven and the space treasure. However, the heart-piercing lock was a real thing connected to the Grand Master of Heaven, and the moment Zen broke the chains, the former's expression changed. Fuxi took his opponent's distraction to his advantage and placed another mark of 8 diagrams on the Grand Master of Heaven's body. Boom! Being hit by Fuxi's strike, the Grand Master of Heaven was sent flying away. Despite the slight elevation in terms of advantage, both Fuxi and Snake Goddess felt a bit strange. This was a life-and-death battle that even a powerful warrior like the Grand Master of Heaven had to go all out with his attacks. That momentary distraction was unlike him. Did he, perhaps, encounter some sort of trouble? No matter what sort of trouble it was, the fact remained that they were currently embroiled in a battle to the death, so Fuxi and the Snake Goddess showed no mercy. Their bodies flashed as they chased after the Grand Master of Heaven. With no time to deal with his oncoming opponents, the Grand Master of Heaven quickly flew backward in retreat. He had been able to trap Othniel into the fishing drum effortlessly because he caught Othniel off guard. If Othniel really managed to escape, that would be the biggest trouble. Since Othniel was still in the fishing drum, the Grand Master of Heaven figured that it would take him a long time to completely break out, which meant that he still had a chance to stop him. Whoosh! However, when the Grand Master of Heaven was sent flying backwards, Fuxi and the Snake Goddess remained relentless in their pursuit. Dang it! The Grand Master of Heaven cursed. Soon enough, he flipped his hands and the 6 soul flags flew in the air. At his command, the 6 soul flags moved on their own and emanated a cold aura that caused the temperature within a 100-mile radius to drop significantly. Refined with 6 powerful ghosts, the 6 soul flags were formidable, and these ghosts could be considered the weapon spirits of the 6 soul flags. From within the flags, 6 black ghosts sporting a single horn on their heads rushed out and let out chilling howls. Usually, these ghosts were the Grand Master of Heaven's trump card and there was no way he'd use them on a regular fight. However, he was faced with no other choice if he had to deal with Othniel. These ghosts would be enough to stop Fuxi and the Snake Goddess for him. Soon enough, the ghosts all collectively headed straight towards Fuxi. Boom, 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 boom. At the approach of these ghosts, Fuxi simply held out his hand and branded all of them with marks of 8 diagrams. There were 6 successive explosive sounds as the ghosts were blown away. They were not destroyed entirely, but the 6 soul flags still suffered heavy damages from Fuxi's attack. The horrifying pained cries of the ghosts made the Grand Master of Heaven even more distressed. He had to move fast since his trump card might not be enough to deter his opponents. He quickly raised the fishing drum and intended to use the power of space to bind Othniel. However, the moment he grabbed it, his whole body froze. The space treasure that had accompanied him for countless years was disconnected from him. Even the lock that bound Othniel had come undone. Could he have broken his fishing drum in such a short period of time? That was impossible. There was no way he could believe it. Just as he was about to forcefully take control of the fishing drum, he heard a light sound coming from the fishing drum. An invisible space fluctuation softly spread out along with the light dongs. Dong, 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 dong. Soon the fishing drum emitted a series of rhythmic sounds. Each soft bang was accompanied by the space fluctuation and even attracted Fuxie's and the snake goddess's attentions. Dong dong dong, dong dong. The Grand Master of Heaven could only stare at the fishing drum with a frown. He was astounded and sighed. There were 9 rhythms that the fishing drum could produce. The one he was hearing now belonged to the 8th rhythm, which meant that the fishing drum was about to release the creatures he had trapped inside. What the heck? How was that possible? The only one who was able to do that was him and him alone. Was it possible that Othniel grasped the method due to his understanding of space truth? Buzz. Faced with the inevitable, the Grand Master of Heaven could only watch as Othniel effortlessly came out of the fishing drum. There was a shared look of unusual shock on both their faces as they looked at each other. Othniel was shocked at Zen's ability. The Grand Master of Heaven was understandably shocked that Othniel was able to come out. What is the matter with Othniel's expression? Why is he confused? Didn't he come out by himself? Just as the Grand Master of Heaven began to think that there might actually be more to this situation, the fishing drum began to beat once again. Dong dong dong, dong dong. It was still the 8th rhythm that signaled the release of a creature trapped within. Soon enough, another person emerged from the drum. It was none other than Zen. The sight of the young man instantly cleared things up for the Grand Master of Heaven. Zen had woken up. So that meant the one who released Othniel was Zen. Of course, this conclusion only led to more confusion. How in the world was this young man able to unlock the heart-piercing lock and take control of the fishing drum? Zen. He woke up. Fuxie and the snake goddess, who stood by the side, were just as equally shocked. If Zen was awake, then that meant he left the eternal scroll painting and managed to obtain a bloodline. He was now a warrior at the eternal realm. However, it would be difficult for him to unleash his newly obtained bloodline since he just reached the eternal realm. There was still no way he'd be able to contend with the Grand Master of Heaven. Also, there was the matter of his and Othniel's emergence from the fishing drum. How in the world were they able to do that? I've helped you out, and now you have to hold up your side of the bargain, Zen told Othniel meaningfully. His words made Fuxie and the snake goddess look at each other in shock. Othniel was released by Zen. How? What had happened to Zen? Othniel simply gave Zen a smile. Of course, I'll make my move, but none of you can leave. As soon as he finished speaking, the fluctuation of space truth began to gush out from his body in waves. The bloodline theurgies of chaos ancient gods were terrifying when they burst out. The only reason Othniel was imprisoned was because he had been caught off guard. It did not have anything to do with skill or power but pure, dumb luck on the Grand Master of Heaven's part. That was why Othniel was resentful at his capture. Now that Othniel was free, there was no way he was going to repeat his mistake. He was determined to kill the Grand Master of Heaven and afterwards, capture Zen. Buzz. A huge, triangular pyramid appeared, spanning 10,000 miles. It was so big and stable that it formed a world on its own. Othniel had pushed the space truth to the limit. This theurgy had exceedingly surpassed the Grand Master of Heaven's fishing drum and made one thing clear: Othniel was not going to let anyone go. Chapter 3480, Restrain Everything. At that moment, a burst of blue light shone from a side of the large triangular pyramid. Upon closer inspection, it appeared that some obscure words formed tiny dots of light. When the blue light lit up, so did the orange light on the second side of the triangular pyramid, then the purple light on the third side, and the gray light under everyone's feet. Fuxie looked up at the triangular pyramid and frowned. The 6 Chaos Ancient Gods were undoubtedly strong, and they possessed extraordinary power of the truth-level theurgy, which relied on the chaos. Othniel gently raised his hand, and the 4 light rays quickly disappeared. Then, the blue light flashed again, and the space fluctuation immediately surrounded the triangular pyramid. In turn, the Grand Master of Heaven, Zen, Fuxie, and the Snake Goddess all fell. It turned out that the space rule in the triangular pyramid had changed. Since the rule that they adapted to wasn't applicable anymore, they could not stay in the air. However, they were aware of the space rule. As soon as the blue light flashed, they sensed that something was wrong. Therefore, they quickly adapted to the new space rule. Among them, the Snake Goddess was the fastest to adapt. After she fell for more than 100 feet, she abruptly stopped midair. Meanwhile, Fuxi and the Grand Master of Heaven managed to stop and float in the air almost simultaneously. The slowest one was Zen. The blood in his body flowed around when the space rule had changed. Moreover, he understood the essence of the triangular pyramid through the ancestry-level bloodline. He had obtained the method to break the triangular pyramid, but he still needed to adapt to the rule by himself. That was why he fell for over 1,000 feet before he barely adapted to it. Othniel sneered when he saw that everyone had steadied themselves in just a short period. Then, the blue light dimmed, and the orange light flashed. The rule changed again, everyone fell again, and they began to adapt to the new rule once more. But just as they had adapted to it, the orange light faded, and the purple light glowed. Othniel had set up a total of 4 space rules. Those sets of rules weren't that different from each other, but they could switch quickly. To put it simply, when the lights on the 4 sides of the triangular pyramid switched, the rules regularly changed. Even the snake goddess now found it hard to adapt to them. She had just adapted to the first rule, but in the next moment, she had to change for the second rule. Before she could fully adjust to the second one, she had to face the third rule. Buzz, buzz. The large triangular pyramid shone with 4 kinds of light. Zen, the Grand Master of Heaven, the Snake Goddess, and Fuxi finally fell hard to the bottom of the space. Meanwhile, the rules in the space were gone. At the same time, Othniel's body changed, and rapidly expanded, until he turned into a massive one-eyed monster. The Grand Master of Heaven looked gravely at the one-eyed monster. After all, he had no choice but to fight a chaos ancient god who was in peak form, while his space theurgy was lacking. Whoosh! At that point, he also grew into a giant with a height of millions of feet. Since Othniel revealed his real body, then the Grand Master of Heaven also activated the wild god body. The 2 gigantic creatures unleashed bursts of energy, which filled every corner of the space as if it was real. It is better if the 2 of them get injured. Fuxi yelled as he looked up at them. It doesn't matter if they are injured or not. The most important thing is that we should leave, Master Fuxi. A loud voice exclaimed behind him. Fuxi turned around and saw Zen. He shook his head and said, "Leave. It might not be that easy to open this space." He stood at the bottom of the triangular pyramid on his tiptoes. It wasn't easy to destroy such a tough space imprisonment. Zen was still too young, and his idea was too simple. "Zen, do you have a way to take us out?" the snake goddess slowly said as she stared at Zen. Based on Zen's tone, it seemed that he had controlled the fishing drum to release Othniel. Furthermore, Othniel could not resist at all because the heart-piercing lock had restrained him. It was likely that Zen had broken the heart-piercing lock. The snake goddess didn't know how Zen had such an incredible ability, but that was most likely related to the bloodline he had obtained. But what kind of bloodline could be so unbelievable? What kind of way can he have? Fuxi shrugged. Zen glanced at Fuxi, squatted down, and gently scratched the ground with his finger. A circular mark appeared on the transparent ground. Clap. He pushed the mark hard, and then a round hole appeared. What is this method? Fuxi's eyes widened. The snake goddess covered her mouth in shock, and smiled. She walked towards the round hole. No matter what kind of method it was, they should leave first. The 3 of them entered the hole, turned into 3 beams of light, and rushed into the space channel. On the other hand, Othniel and the Grand Master of Heaven were still in battle inside the triangular pyramid. The triangular pyramid completely isolated both their auras and voices. The Grand Master of Heaven attacked in a slightly passive way since he still couldn't use the space law. However, he was still stronger than Othniel. The 2 of them fiercely kept fighting each other. Othniel had sensed that Zen penetrated the triangular pyramid he had released, but he had no time to care about that because he currently focused on his battle against the Grand Master of Heaven. Thus, he had no choice but to let Zen run away. In the space channel, Fuxi, the snake goddess, and Zen all flew at high speed. Although they were still in danger, Fuxi couldn't wait to ask, "How did you do it? You shouldn't be able to suppress or control both the fishing drum and the Grand Master of Heaven." When Zen casually drew a circular mark just now, it looked simple, but Fuxi felt the unique energy from it. That energy was also a kind of space power, but it was very different from Othniel's. Othniel's space power came from the truth. And what kind of power did Zen use? The opposite truth. He felt amused by his guess, but that was his intuition. On the contrary, the snake goddess attentively listened as she didn't have any baseless speculations. Since Zen had entered the deepest part of the eternal scroll painting and successfully came back, he must have obtained a unique bloodline power, and at least it was stronger than that of the Eye Spirit. "I can find a way to restrain the opponents in a short period of time," Zen said. Fuxi narrowed his eyes and gently waved his hand at Zen. The mark of the 8 diagrams appeared on his body. Is there any way to restrain it? He had never heard of a Thurgi that could restrain the Grand Master of Heaven and Othniel in a short period, so of course, he wanted to verify it in person. In turn, Zen got up and dusted his body. The mark of the 8 diagrams just fell off him like dust. When Fuxi saw what happened, the corners of his eyes twitched.